Someone handed you a list of humanity's greatest inventions. Half of them were embarrassing failures that killed people, wasted fortunes, or solved problems that didn't exist. Here are 101 of them. 1. The Segway was going to replace walking, revolutionize cities, and make cars obsolete. A genuine leap forward that the world simply wasn't ready for. Dean Kamen hyped it in 2001 as something that cities would be built around. Steve Jobs reportedly called it as big as the personal computer. Neither prediction aged with anything resembling dignity. The gyroscopic self-balancing system required a continuous power source, which meant the moment the battery died mid-ride, your $5,000 machine became a $5,000 faceplant device. Kamen's internal projections targeted 10,000 units per week. The company sold approximately 30,000 in its first 5 years combined. That's not being ahead of your time. That's being wrong about your time. And then there's the detail that Jimmy Heselden, the man who bought the Segway company in 2009, died after accidentally riding one off a cliff at his own estate. The machine literally claimed its owner. Humanity looked at walking, a free calorie-burning activity perfected over 3 million years of evolution, and decided the upgrade was a standing scooter that made you look like a tourist who lost a bet at the airport. 2. Measuring the bumps on someone's skull could scientifically reveal their intelligence, personality, criminal tendencies, and moral character. A revolutionary diagnostic tool embraced by serious scientists and respectable institutions. Franz Joseph Gall founded phrenology in the late 18th century, claiming 27 distinct mental organs could be read through scalp topography. Universities took this seriously for over 50 years. Phrenology helmets and machines were mass-produced commercial products sold well into the 1930s. The Lavery electric phrenolometer, produced in 1907, was a helmet covered in sensors that produced printed personality readings. Let that land for a second. A printed report, based on your skull bumps. And this was sold through legitimate channels to actual people who used the results to make actual decisions. Phrenology was used in hiring decisions, immigration screening, criminal sentencing, and institutionalization of people deemed mentally unfit, all based on the geometry of their head. Neuroscience has confirmed the skull bears zero relationship to brain structure underneath. The bumps reflect bone formation, nothing else. You were judged, hired, imprisoned, or committed based on how your skeleton grew. Humanity built medical devices to read potential from a scalp, which is roughly as scientific as judging a book's content by denting the spine and measuring the crinkles. 3. Radium, freshly discovered, glowing, and mysterious, was the miracle wellness ingredient of the early 20th century, confidently infused into water, toothpaste, chocolate, and face cream as a genuine health enhancer. Radithor, sold through the 1920s, was a bottled water product containing real radium, marketed as a cure for over 160 diseases. Industrialist Eben Byers drank nearly 1,400 bottles. He died when his jaw disintegrated. Thoradia was a French cosmetic line from 1933 containing thorium and radium, sold as an anti-aging cream that made skin radiate youth. That was not a metaphor. They meant it literally. The Radium Girls, factory workers who painted clock dials with radium paint and were instructed to tip their brushes with their lips, developed severe radiation poisoning and filed one of history's first major corporate safety lawsuits. Radium had genuine scientific prestige following Marie Curie's Nobel Prize, and marketers weaponized that prestige with absolutely zero understanding of the underlying physics. Humanity discovered a glowing element that dissolved bone and immediately decided the correct move was to put it in toothpaste. That is the cosmetic equivalent of seasoning your dinner with enriched uranium because the packaging looked impressive. 4. The hula hoop wasn't just a toy. It was heralded as a genuine exercise apparatus that would transform American physical fitness and reshape the human body. Whammo sold 25 million hula hoops in the first 4 months after its 1958 launch. Within a year, they were selling off unsold stock for pennies and halting production because the market had collectively reconsidered its recent decisions. The fitness claims were entirely invented by marketing copy. No clinical trial supported them. The caloric burn from casual hula hooping is comparable to a slow walk, which is something you were already doing without needing a plastic ring. The concept was not even new. Hooping exercises had existed in various forms for centuries. Whammo simply replaced wood and bamboo with polyethylene, convinced an entire country it was revolutionary, and then watched the entire premise evaporate before the year was out. West Germany, Japan, and the Soviet Union banned or discouraged the hoop on grounds ranging from moral concern to it being a symbol of American cultural emptiness. 3 separate governments looked at a spinning plastic ring and issued an official response. Humanity believed that standing in your living room, rotating a plastic circle around your midsection, was a fitness breakthrough. The same logic as calling elevator buttons a cardio program. 5. Standing passively while a motorized belt jiggled your stomach would redistribute or eliminate fat. A genuine weight loss technology used in gyms, spas, and doctors' offices across the mid-20th century. Vibrating belt machines were introduced in the 1850s as passive exercise devices. They peaked commercially through the 1970s and appeared in legitimate medical spas alongside licensed professionals who recommended them with straight faces. The machines generated no metabolic response capable of reducing adipose tissue. The only physiological effect was mild surface circulation, identical to what happens when you scratch your arm for 20 minutes, which is also free. They were marketed with clinical sounding terminology like mechanotherapy and endorsed as equivalent to manual exercise. Gyms charged premium session rates. The machines are still being sold today in modified forms, rebranded as whole body vibration therapy. The science supporting weight loss from vibration remains absent. Not limited, not contested, absent. You stood next to a motor while it shook your abdomen and paid for the privilege. Standing next to a washing machine on the spin cycle would have delivered an identical physiological outcome and cost you nothing except your dignity, which the original machine was already quietly taking every single session. 6. Drilling a hole in the human skull was a sophisticated medical procedure practiced across civilizations for thousands of years as a treatment for headaches, epilepsy, and mental illness. A bold sign of medical progress and human ingenuity. Trepanation is one of the oldest surgical procedures in recorded history, with evidence dating back 7,000 years across Europe, South America, and Africa. Some skulls show multiple holes, suggesting certain patients survived the initial procedure and were somehow brought back for more. Hippocrates prescribed trepanation for head trauma. Medieval surgeons recommended it for migraines. In the Renaissance, it was performed for melancholy, a term covering depression, anxiety, and general unhappiness, which means someone drilled into your skull because you were having a rough month. Bart Hughes, a Dutch proponent in the 1960s, self-trepanned with an electric drill in 1965, claiming it elevated consciousness by increasing brain blood flow. He documented it on film and became briefly famous. There is no credible clinical evidence that trepanation alleviates migraines, epilepsy, or psychiatric conditions. Some practitioners still advocate for it today. Humanity's solution to a headache was to give the headache a door to leave through, and then charge the neighbor $400 to install the same door. 7. The atomic age promised that nuclear power would soon run everything, including the family car, and the consumer nuclear future was treated as a practical inevitability, not a fever dream cooked up by people who had recently watched a city evaporate. The Ford Nucleon was a 1958 concept car designed with a small fission reactor in the rear, with the expectation that consumers would swap fuel cores at atomic stations the same way they filled up with gasoline. Ford's own engineers acknowledged that no reactor existed that was small enough, light enough, or safe enough for consumer use. But they pitched the concept anyway, because confidence was apparently considered an adequate substitute for physics. General Electric simultaneously produced a promotional film called A is for Atom, released in 1953, promising nuclear-powered homes, planes, and ships within a generation. Not one of those consumer nuclear applications materialized as described. The radiation shielding required to make an onboard reactor safe would have made the vehicle weigh approximately as much as a naval destroyer, which eliminates the transportation use case in a fairly decisive way. The 1950s looked at nuclear weapons, which had just flattened 2 cities, and decided the logical next step was parking one in a suburban driveway. 8. Filtered cigarettes were a genuine health innovation, the tobacco industry's responsible, medically sound response to growing concerns about smoking, offering a safer alternative to the terrifying unfiltered version. Kent cigarettes launched in 1952 with a micronite filter containing chrysidolite asbestos. They marketed this as a health feature until 1956. Cigarette filters do not remove a meaningful percentage of carcinogenic compounds. They remove some tar while allowing ultrafine particles and volatile chemicals to pass through, and some studies suggest they actually increase lung cancer risk relative to unfiltered cigarettes, because filters allow smokers to inhale more deeply with greater confidence. The filter was invented in 1925 and adopted by the industry not for health reasons, but because it reduced tobacco costs by shortening the smokable portion of each cigarette. That was the real innovation, selling you less product while charging you for a safety feature that made things measurably worse. A 2020 study estimated that cigarette filters, made of cellulose acetate plastic, generate approximately 766,000 metric tons of toxic waste per year, making them the single most collected plastic waste item globally. The filter was a safety feature, the same way a decorative railing on a cliff is a safety feature. It looks exactly right, gives you complete confidence, and the fall happens anyway. 9. The Wardenclyffe Tower was a suppressed genius project that would have given the world free energy if not for corporate sabotage by greedy financiers who couldn't tolerate Nikola Tesla's vision. This is the version of the story people repeat with absolute certainty, and almost none of it survives contact with the actual historical record. J.P. Morgan funded Wardenclyffe to the equivalent of roughly $5 million in today's money before pulling out, not because of conspiracy, but because Tesla could not demonstrate a working transmission system or explain how it would generate revenue. The physics of wireless global power transmission via ground conduction would require energy losses so vast that it would be economically non-functional even by modern engineering standards. Tesla himself acknowledged in correspondence that the system was incomplete and that he needed additional funding to resolve core technical problems, which is not what a finished, suppressed invention looks like. The site was repossessed for debt and demolished in 1917. Tesla's later years included claims of a death ray and communication with Venus, which complicates the straightforward suppressed genius narrative considerably. Celebrating Wardenclyffe as a suppressed masterpiece is like celebrating an unfinished bridge as proof the river was afraid of progress. The structure was incomplete, not intercepted. 10. The prefrontal lobotomy was a Nobel Prize-winning psychiatric innovation that offered genuine relief to patients with severe mental illness, a landmark moment in the humane treatment of the human mind. Antonio Egas Moniz won the 1949 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for inventing the lobotomy. The prize has never been rescinded. Walter Freeman performed approximately 3,500 lobotomies in the United States, including on patients as young as 12. He traveled the country in a van he called the Lobotomobile, performing procedures in offices without sterile conditions, which is an image that should require no additional commentary. Rosemary Kennedy, sister of President John F. Kennedy, received a lobotomy at age 23 for mild mood instability. The procedure left her with the cognitive capacity of a young child for the remaining 64 years of her life. The practice was largely abandoned not through ethical reckoning, but because chlorpromazine, the first antipsychotic medication, became available in 1954, offering an alternative that didn't require destroying brain tissue with a metal spike. The medical community celebrated removing the front of people's brains the way you'd celebrate fixing a warning light by cutting the wire to the dashboard. The signal stopped, but what caused it never did. 11. Bloodletting was the cornerstone of Western medicine for over 2,000 years. A rational, evidence-based treatment endorsed by the greatest medical minds from ancient Egypt through the 19th century. This wasn't fringe practice. This was the mainstream. The framework was humoral theory. Illness resulted from an imbalance of blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and the solution was to drain the thing that was causing the problem, which was often the blood. George Washington died in 1799 after physicians removed approximately 40% of his blood volume over 12 hours to treat a throat infection. Most historians conclude the bloodletting, not the infection, was what killed him. Pierre Charles Alexandre Louis published statistical evidence in 1835 demonstrating that patients treated with bloodletting had higher mortality rates than those who were not. The medical establishment largely ignored him for decades. France imported 40 million leeches per year by 1830 because demand for bloodletting had nearly exhausted the country's leech supply. 40 million per year for a procedure that was killing people at a measurably higher rate than doing nothing. For 3,000 years, the primary tool of professional medicine was draining the thing that keeps the patient alive, the therapeutic equivalent of fixing a leaking pipe by removing the water pressure. 12. Thalidomide was a properly vetted, rigorously tested pharmaceutical product approved by regulatory agencies as a safe sedative and morning sickness treatment for pregnant women, a responsible product of modern pharmaceutical science. It was approved in 46 countries, marketed under 37 brand names, and sold as a treatment for morning sickness. Approximately 10,000 children were born with phocomelia, severely shortened or absent limbs, as a direct result. Thalidomide was not tested on pregnant animals before human approval. When tested retrospectively, it produced identical limb deformities in rabbits, a test that would have flagged the danger before a single human dose was dispensed. The United States was largely spared because FDA reviewer Francis Kelsey refused to approve the drug without additional safety data and faced enormous commercial pressure to sign off anyway. She didn't. West Germany, where it was developed, approved it without that hesitation. The disaster directly produced the 1962 Kefauver-Harris Amendment, which fundamentally restructured how drugs are approved in America. Thalidomide was approved as safe for pregnant women the same way a bridge gets approved as structurally sound, except the inspection happened after 10,000 people had already crossed it, and the water below was full of evidence that it wasn't. 13. The pet rock was a harmless novelty gag that nobody actually took seriously. A brief cultural joke that the market quickly and sensibly corrected. Gary Dahl launched the pet rock in 1975 after joking at a bar about wanting a pet that required zero maintenance. He sourced Rosarita Beach stones from Mexico for pennies, placed them in gift boxes with air holes, and included a 32-page training manual. The manual provided instructions for teaching your rock to sit and to stay. Commands rocks execute with perfect compliance, regardless of training, and offered guidance on the roll over command, which the manual acknowledged may require your assistance. He sold 1.5 million pet rocks by Christmas of that year, clearing an estimated $15 million in 6 months. Dozens of imitators followed immediately. Pet sticks, pet boulders, pet eggs. None matched the original's sales figures, primarily because Dahl had already proven the market existed, and the market then paused to reconsider its recent decisions. The pet rock proved that if you package something with sufficient confidence and a training manual, you can sell anyone something they are currently standing on, and they will thank you for it, leave a positive review, and feel good about the purchase. 14. Bayer Pharmaceuticals' launch of heroin in 1898 was a responsible, research-backed medical product designed as a safe, non-addictive alternative to morphine, a genuine humanitarian advance from a serious pharmaceutical company. They named it heroin from the German word heroisch, meaning heroic, because test patients reported feeling heroic after taking it. That was the data. People felt powerful and confident and bold, and Bayer's researchers interpreted this as evidence of non-addiction, rather than the far more obvious interpretation that the drug was producing intense euphoria. Heroin was sold over the counter in pharmacies across Europe and North America. It was marketed specifically as a non-addictive substitute for morphine in patients who had already become addicted to morphine, meaning the pharmaceutical industry's solution to an opioid addiction crisis was a faster-acting, more powerful opioid with a confident press release. Bayer continued selling heroin commercially until 1913. The Harrison Narcotics Tax Act restricted it in the United States in 1914. By then, addiction rates had created documented public health emergencies across multiple countries. Bayer's solution to morphine dependency was to manufacture something stronger and label it safe, the pharmaceutical equivalent of putting out a fire with a second fire specifically designed to burn at a higher temperature. 15. Aviation pioneer Franz Reichelt was a man of genuine courage and vision, testing his wearable parachute suit in the heroic spirit of early flight. A bold inventor who gave everything to his work. What he gave, specifically and literally, was his life on February 4th, 1912, in front of photographers at the Eiffel Tower in Paris after jumping from the first platform at 57 meters. Reichelt was a tailor. He had previously tested his parachute coat by dropping mannequins from a fourth-floor window. He obtained permission from Paris authorities to conduct a test from the Eiffel Tower by leading them to believe he intended to use a dummy. He did not use a dummy. When witnesses urged him to test with a dummy first, he reportedly indicated he was confident enough in the design to test it personally. He hesitated for approximately 40 seconds at the edge. Then he jumped. The suit failed completely. He fell essentially in free fall. The autopsy confirmed he died from the impact, not a prior cardiac event. The suit provided zero meaningful drag. The entire event was captured on film and remains viewable today. Reichelt skipped the step where you confirm the invention works before deploying it from the tallest structure in the country, the engineering equivalent of taste testing your own poison to confirm the recipe is good. 16. The electric muscle stimulation belt, a device using electrical pulses to create involuntary abdominal contractions, was a scientifically credible shortcut to defined musculature, endorsed by celebrities and sold through major retailers with clinical-sounding terminology and very confident infomercials. The Abtronic, the Ab Energizer, and the Fast Abs were three of the highest-selling infomercial products of the early 2000s. Combined United States sales exceeded $100 million before the Federal Trade Commission got involved. Independent studies commissioned for the subsequent litigation found no statistically significant change in abdominal strength, endurance, or girth measurements in device users compared to control groups. None. The advertising featured athletes and fitness professionals who had obtained their physiques through conventional training, implying their appearance resulted from wearing the product. A deceptive endorsement strategy whose transparency did not appear to reduce its effectiveness. EMS technology does produce measurable muscle contractions in clinical physical therapy contexts, specifically for injury rehabilitation in patients with limited voluntary movement. The application to fat reduction in healthy sedentary users has no physiological pathway. The electric ab belt promised that if you sat still while a machine made your stomach twitch, you would develop the physique of someone who had not sat still, and $100 million worth of people found this completely plausible. 17. Hugo Gernsback, pioneering science fiction publisher and inventor, designed the isolator in 1925 as a serious, practical productivity device for the modern knowledge worker, a genuine ergonomic breakthrough for professional concentration. The isolator was a wooden helmet. It had tiny eye slits. It blocked all external sound and peripheral vision. It attached to an oxygen tank because the sealed interior caused carbon dioxide buildup, which meant that focused productivity was strictly limited by how long the user could breathe before the oxygen ran out, making the isolator perhaps the only office productivity device that set a hard biological deadline on your work session. Gernsback debuted it in the July 1925 issue of Science and Invention magazine, featuring himself wearing the device at his desk as a practical recommendation for other professionals. No irony was intended. He was genuinely proud of this. The fundamental problem the isolator addressed, external distraction, was also solvable by closing a door, a technology that required no carpentry, no supplemental oxygen supply, and did not make the user look like they were preparing for an undersea expedition at their own desk. Gernsback's solution to office distraction was to seal a person inside a wooden box with a personal oxygen tank, a productivity system that works precisely until the oxygen does not. 18 medicated cigarettes, sold openly in pharmacies and recommended by licensed physicians, were a legitimate pharmaceutical product providing real bronchial relief to asthma sufferers through antispasmodic herbal smoke. Asthma cigarettes containing stramonium, belladonna, and potassium nitrate were sold commercially from the 1880s through the mid-20th century under pharmaceutical brand names including Potter's Asthma Cure and Himrod's Asthma Cure. Stramonium does contain atropine, which relaxes bronchial smooth muscle, so the active compound was real. The delivery mechanism of combustion smoke, however, simultaneously irritated and damaged the respiratory tissue it was allegedly treating, which is a design flaw significant enough to anchor any product recall. The British Pharmaceutical Codex listed asthma cigarettes as a legitimate preparation until 1941. Physicians prescribed them. Pharmacies stocked them in labeled boxes with dosage instructions. The modern metered dose inhaler, introduced in 1956, delivered the same active compounds through a mechanism that did not also fill the patient's lungs with smoke, and sales of asthma cigarettes collapsed immediately after. Prescribing smoke inhalation for a breathing disorder is the same diagnostic logic as prescribing drowning as a treatment for dehydration. The substance is technically relevant to the condition, and the delivery method is doing most of the killing. 19. The calorie numbers printed on food labels are precise scientific measurements. The product of rigorous testing that tells you exactly how much energy your body will extract from everything you eat. Those neat figures look like law. They are educated guesses based on 19th century methods that burn food in a laboratory chamber and assume your body processes it identically. Your body does not. You don't absorb 100% of what you eat. You extract fewer calories from almonds or beans than the label claims because your digestive system cannot fully break them down. The Atwater system, the calorie calculation method still used today, was developed in the 1880s and assigns fixed calorie values per gram of protein, fat, and carbohydrate that do not account for food structure, individual gut microbiome variation, or cooking method. A raw almond and a roasted almond have the same label. Your body disagrees with that label at a meaningful level. The FDA permits a 20% margin of error on calorie labeling, which means the 300-calorie item you're tracking might contain anywhere between 240 and 360 calories. A range wide enough to swallow your entire daily deficit without anyone technically lying to you. 20, the tongue map you were handed in school, sweet at the tip, bitter at the back, salty and sour on the sides, is a scientific fact that belongs in every classroom and describes exactly how your taste system works. It is a mistranslation of a 19th century German paper that was already describing something more nuanced than the diagram that became a global classroom staple. The original 1891 paper by D.P. Honig described subtle regional variations in taste sensitivity, variations that were modest and did not support the discrete zone model. Edwin Boring's influential 1942 textbook introduced the now iconic tongue map diagram as a concrete illustration and acknowledged the original data's limitations before ignoring them anyway. Taste receptor cells for all 5 primary tastes, sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami, are distributed across the entire tongue surface, as well as the palate, epiglottis, and upper esophagus. There are no exclusive zones. The map persisted in American textbooks until the 1980s, when neuroscience provided sufficient cellular-level evidence to force corrections. Some textbooks included the diagram as late as the 2000s. A misread German paper became a classroom diagram that outlasted 2 world wars and the invention of the internet because nobody thought to taste test the diagram before printing it on 50 million worksheets. 21. Margarine was scientifically formulated as a heart-healthy, medically superior alternative to butter. A genuine nutritional improvement endorsed by the American Heart Association that responsible, informed consumers should adopt over traditional dairy fat. The American Heart Association began recommending margarine over butter in the 1960s based on the hypothesis that saturated fat caused heart disease. This recommendation persisted for approximately 30 years. The problem was the process that makes margarine solid. Partial hydrogenation, converting liquid vegetable oil into a spreadable fat, produces trans fatty acids, which raise LDL cholesterol and simultaneously lower HDL cholesterol. The net cardiovascular impact is worse than saturated fat by most clinical measures. You were told to swap the thing that was bad for a thing that was worse by the organization specifically tasked with protecting your heart, based on research that seemed correct until it wasn't. The FDA required trans fat labeling in 2006 and effectively banned partially hydrogenated oils in 2015. The American Heart Association revised its margarine recommendations accordingly. Margarine was prescribed as a medical improvement over butter with the same confidence that all medical improvements are prescribed, until the follow-up study arrived and confirmed the improvement was worse than the original problem in at least 3 measurable ways. 22. The built-in dashboard ashtray and cigarette lighter were a thoughtful, safety-conscious automotive innovation, giving drivers a contained, designated smoking system that made lighting up behind the wheel safer and more civilized for everyone in the vehicle. Automakers spent genuine engineering resources designing a system to help people smoke while operating heavy machinery at speed, installed it at eye level adjacent to the speedometer, and called the result a standard feature. The act of lighting a cigarette while driving requires removing one hand from the wheel, locating and extracting the lighter, applying it to the cigarette, and returning it to its housing. A multi-step manual task performed at highway speeds, with eyes frequently departing the road at critical intervals. Multiple automotive safety studies from the 1970s onward identified in-car smoking as a distracted driving behavior comparable to early mobile phone use, contributing to reaction time delays and lane departure incidents. The cigarette lighter socket's survival as a power port, now standard for phone chargers and GPS devices, means the infrastructure built specifically to support in-car smoking is today one of the most universally used automotive convenience features in existence. The in-car smoking set is history's most elegant pivot, an apparatus built to help people do something dangerous, while driving now powers the device people use to do something equally dangerous while driving. 23. Mercury-based teething powders were legitimate. Physician-endorsed pharmaceutical products providing genuine relief to infants during the painful teething process, a responsible Victorian-era medical intervention for one of early childhood's most common experiences. Steedman's soothing powders, containing calomel, mercurous chloride, were sold in Britain from the 1890s through 1954 as an over-the-counter teething remedy, recommended by general practitioners and stocked in pharmacies. They produced a condition called acrodynia, painful pink extremities, irritability, hair loss, and muscle weakness. Physicians classified acrodynia as a mysterious childhood disease for decades. The connection to the powders was established in 1947. British medical authorities continued allowing sales for 7 additional years after the cause was identified. The United States had banned calomel in children's products in 1898, 56 years before Britain, meaning British children were exposed to the product for more than half a century after American children were protected by the exact same knowledge. The differential was not scientific. It was regulatory momentum. Mercury teething powder converted a painful but temporary infant discomfort into a potentially fatal poisoning syndrome for decades, and the medical community classified the poisoning as a separate, unrelated disease for most of that time, which is not how separate, unrelated diseases typically work. 24. The amphibious bicycle. A pedal-powered vehicle designed to transition between road travel and water travel, represented a genuine dual-purpose transportation innovation, solving a practical problem for anyone navigating environments where both surfaces needed to be crossed. The amphibious bicycle is heavier than a bicycle, slower than a boat, less maneuverable than either, and requires physical conversion between modes at the water's edge, which is also where a normal bicycle can be left while you locate a boat. Amphibious bicycle patents appear in the United States Patent Database from the 1870s onward. The product has appeared in the Hammacher-Schlemmer catalog at multiple points across the 20th and 21st centuries, which tells you something about both the product and the catalog. The hydrodynamic inefficiency of a bicycle frame and wheel assembly in water requires significant flotation additions, pontoons, inflatable tubes, paddle wheel attachments, that add weight and wind resistance, degrading land performance substantially. Typical amphibious bicycle water speeds are approximately 3 to 5 miles per hour, comparable to a slow swimming pace. The market for dual land and water transportation is served adequately by the combination of a bicycle and a separate boat. Two specialized tools that each outperform the compromise by wide margins, a fact the amphibious bicycle has been failing to disprove for 150 years. 25. The vivid orange-red glaze of early Fiesta dinnerware was simply a bold aesthetic choice. A modern, striking color for Depression-era American kitchens that became iconic purely through its design appeal and the quality of the product it adorned. The original Fiesta red glaze contained uranium oxide, a radioactive compound, and was mass-produced for American household dining from 1936 through 1943. The U.S. government's War Production Board seized Homer Laughlin China Company's uranium supply in 1943 for use in atomic weapons development. The company did not discontinue the color because someone checked whether uranium belonged on a dinner plate. They discontinued it because the government took their ingredient for the Manhattan Project, which means the safety review that ended radioactive dinnerware was conducted by the weapons program, not the food safety program. Vintage pre-1943 pieces remain common in antique markets today and produce measurable radiation readings with a Geiger counter. The FDA studied them in the 90s and concluded that radiation exposure from normal use was minimal, though they advised against storing acidic foods in the pieces because acid leaching could mobilize uranium compounds from the glaze. The color was discontinued not because someone questioned uranium on dinnerware, but because the federal government needed the uranium for something more immediately dangerous. 26. The typewriter correction wheel was a genuine productivity tool, a necessary accessory for professional typists worldwide that provided efficient, reliable error correction and was used by serious administrative professionals as a standard part of their craft. The typewriter erasing wheel corrected your errors by physically abrading the paper fiber away, creating a thin spot visible when held to light, scattering paper dust directly into the typewriter mechanism, and requiring perfect realignment before retyping. A process so demanding it frequently produced a second error requiring a second erasure in immediate succession. The machines included a brush on the opposite end, specifically to remove paper dust from the typewriter's internal components, which is the product acknowledging that its correction process damaged the equipment being used to correct the document. Correction fluid was invented in 1956 by Bette Nesmith Graham, a secretary who mixed tempera paint in her kitchen to cover errors. She kept the project secret from her employer. Her product eventually sold to Gillette Corporation for $47.5 million in 1979. The IBM Selectric introduced a lift-off correction tape in 1961 that removed ink cleanly without abrasion. Multiple superior solutions appeared without the typewriter erasing wheel being discontinued. It simply coexisted with its replacements, generating paper dust into mechanisms that had already moved past needing it. 27. Small mechanical and electromechanical table appliances designed to cool hot soup to eating temperature represented the Victorian and Edwardian era's embrace of technology for domestic comfort. Charming early examples of the labor-saving household innovation that would eventually define modern life. Engineers constructed mechanical devices to accelerate the cooling of soup, addressing a problem that is solved with identical effectiveness by waiting the same amount of time with no device, no maintenance, no power source, and no small rotating fan aimed at your bowl to explain to dinner guests. The Victorian period's enthusiasm for mechanical table devices reflected a broader cultural association between mechanical complexity and social sophistication at the dining table. The more elaborate the equipment, the more elevated the household. Patents for soup cooling devices and table fans specifically designed for food temperature management appear in late 19th and early 20th century databases in Britain, France, and the United States. The thermal physics are real but modest. A fan increases convective heat transfer by a factor of approximately 2 to 4 over still air, meaning the time saved on a bowl of soup is measured in minutes. The soup cooling fan converts money, maintenance, and social awkwardness into saved minutes. Roughly 3 minutes of waiting exchanged for 30 minutes of explaining why there is a small mechanical fan pointed at the tureen. 28 mechanical chin straps and jaw support devices of the Victorian era were among the earliest medical device interventions for sleep-disordered breathing, a legitimate early attempt by thoughtful inventors to address a recognized domestic and health concern through applied engineering. Victorian anti-snoring devices mechanically force the mouth closed during sleep, which addresses mouth-breathing snoring and removes the patient's emergency airway during obstructive sleep apnea, the more serious condition that snoring frequently signals, because preventing the mouth from opening also prevents compensatory mouth breathing when the upper airway collapses. Obstructive sleep apnea was not formally described as a medical syndrome until 1965. Victorian anti-snoring device designers were not aware they were potentially eliminating emergency airway access in apnea patients. They were solving the problem they could hear, which was the snoring, without awareness of the problem they couldn't hear, which was the airway collapsing. Modern chin straps are still sold today and are specifically contraindicated for moderate to severe sleep apnea for precisely this reason. The contraindication the Victorian device had, and nobody knew to write down. The CPAP device, the current gold standard for sleep apnea, maintains positive pressure in the airway rather than forcing the mouth shut, a mechanically different solution that doesn't address the snoring by removing the backup system. 29. The battery-powered rotating ice cream cone holder, which spins the cone while you hold your tongue stationary, is a practical consumer innovation solving the recognized ergonomic challenge of achieving uniform coverage during ice cream consumption. The motorized ice cream cone addresses the problem of rotating a cone, which is a task the human wrist performs with zero power consumption, zero mechanical components, and zero possibility of battery failure at a moment that matters. Motorized cone holders are commercially available products sold on major retail platforms in multiple designs. The product addresses licking pattern inefficiency, a problem also solved by rotating your wrist, rotating the cone with your fingers, or licking in a deliberate circular pattern, all of which are free, require no charging, and present no mechanical failure modes. Battery failure during ice cream consumption, a failure mode that does not exist for wrist rotation, introduces a maintenance consideration not previously associated with dessert. The motorized cone's rotation speed is fixed, removing your natural ability to modulate speed based on ice cream texture, temperature, and preference, a customization the human wrist has offered without charge since the ice cream cone was invented in approximately 1904. This product introduced a charging protocol into a food category that previously had no power requirements and was doing perfectly fine. 30. The paper tea bag was deliberately invented as a purpose-built tea infusion device, a thoughtful innovation designed from the outset to improve the tea drinking experience through hygienic, convenient, single-use containment. Thomas Sullivan, a New York tea merchant, began sending samples in small, hand-sewn silk muslin bags in 1908 as a cost-saving alternative to tins. Customers misunderstood the bags as brewing devices and placed them directly in hot water. Orders for bagged tea followed. Sullivan did not intend for the bags to be brewed whole. The tea industry then spent years debating whether the bag format, which restricts leaf expansion and reduces surface area contact with water, produced inferior tea compared to loose leaf brewing. Tea specialists maintain this position today and have the extraction data to support it. The paper tea bag became standard after the Second World War, when silk and muslin costs made cloth bags prohibitive. Paper bags introduced additional off flavors from the fiber itself. Approximately 96% of tea consumed in Britain is now brewed using tea bags. The bag format produces measurably inferior extraction by every technical standard, a quality compromise accepted permanently by 96% of an entire nation because a merchant in New York accidentally shipped his samples in the wrong container and his customers brewed the packaging. 31. Magnetic therapy bracelets, worn on the wrist and containing permanent magnets, provide genuine health benefits through magnetic field interaction with blood iron content, reducing inflammation, improving circulation, and relieving joint pain through established physical mechanisms. The iron in your blood is bound to hemoglobin in a form that is not ferromagnetic. It does not respond to the static magnetic fields produced by a bracelet. Oxyhemoglobin is actually diamagnetic. It is very slightly repelled by magnetic fields, rather than attracted to them, meaning the bracelet's central scientific premise runs in the wrong direction entirely. Sales of magnetic therapy products in the United States alone exceeded $500 million annually in the early 2000s. A 2004 Mayo Clinic randomized controlled trial found no significant difference in pain or function between participants wearing magnetic bracelets and those wearing demagnetized placebo bracelets in an osteoarthritis population. The FTC pursued multiple manufacturers for false advertising. Magnetherapy Inc. settled a $1 million action in 2000. Multiple subsequent manufacturers received warning letters for making identical claims using identical language. The magnetic therapy bracelet has been selling the premise that blood responds to wrist magnets for decades, a claim that would be useful if blood iron behaved like a refrigerator magnet, which anyone who has attempted to pick up a blood sample with a magnet has already disproven. 32. Someone patented a hat that converted into a parachute, and this was treated as a contribution to the serious, human-centered aviation safety thinking of the early 20th century. A creative exploration of every possible avenue for protecting people who fell from aircraft. Franz Well received a patent in 1912 for a parachute hat, a headgear device incorporating a collapsible canopy designed to deploy and slow descent in the event of a fall from altitude. A functional parachute requires a canopy of approximately 24 to 28 feet in diameter to adequately slow a falling adult to a survivable landing speed. A hat brim can accommodate a fabric fold of approximately 3 to 6 inches. The parachute hat's canopy, when deployed at the scale physically achievable within a hat's dimensions, would reduce terminal velocity by a marginal percentage, a rate improvement measurable in physics and entirely meaningless in survival outcomes. The parachute hat patent was not unique in its optimism. Multiple early aviation safety patents demonstrate a systematic underestimation of the canopy size required for effective drag generation, reflecting a general unfamiliarity with the specific numbers connecting fabric area to air resistance to survivable deceleration. The hat was designed by someone who understood that parachutes slow falls and hats sit on heads, and combined those facts without consulting the arithmetic that connects them. 33 perpetual motion machines, devices producing continuous motion or energy output without external input, attracted serious investment, patent applications, and genuine public enthusiasm as legitimate engineering innovations throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, representing bold scientific ambition. The U.S. Patent Office stopped accepting perpetual motion machine patents in 1911, requiring working models as proof of concept. That requirement has never been satisfied by any submission. The first and second laws of thermodynamics were well understood by the time most of these patents were filed, meaning inventors were either unaware of the established physics their devices contradicted, or willfully ignoring it in favor of a preferred conclusion. Johann Bessler demonstrated his Bessler-Rad perpetual motion wheel across Europe from 1712 to 1727, charging admission and attracting investment from credible figures, including Leibniz. The device was ultimately a suspected fraud involving concealed mechanisms operated by a hidden assistant. The free energy movement of the late 20th and early 21st centuries is a direct continuation of the perpetual motion tradition, rebranded with quantum mechanical terminology used incorrectly but sounding sufficiently technical to attract funding. The perpetual motion machine is the only product category where the laws of physics have been on record rejecting applications since 1911, and the applications keep arriving, because the desire for something that runs forever at no cost is apparently stronger than the willingness to read the rejection letter. 34. Shoe stores in the 1940s installed X-ray machines operated by retail salespeople with no radiation training that X-rayed customers' feet inside shoes to demonstrate fit, and this was considered a scientifically advanced, customer-friendly retail innovation, bringing medical imaging to everyday shopping. Petoscopes were estimated to be installed in approximately 10,000 shoe stores across the United States by the late 1940s. The machines delivered radiation doses per use ranging from half a Roentgen to 10 Roentgens per foot, with significant leakage from unshielded sides affecting the salesperson standing next to it for 8 hours per day across an entire career. Some models had viewport openings for the customer, the salesperson, and a parent to all view simultaneously, a feature ensuring that multiple people per transaction received unnecessary radiation exposure from a device installed to sell shoes. State-level restrictions began in the late 1940s. The last U.S. state to ban the devices was Louisiana in 1981, meaning Americans were X-raying their children's feet in shoe stores within living memory. The actual fit information provided was largely redundant. A competent fitter using manual measurement could determine fit without imaging. The device's primary commercial function was novelty. You were receiving radiation to confirm a purchase decision you had effectively already made. 35 gas-powered hair curling devices using small butane cartridges freed you from the constraints of electrical outlets and enabled salon-quality styling anywhere. A genuine advance in personal grooming technology for the modern mobile consumer. The solution to styling hair away from an outlet was to attach a small pressurized gas cartridge to a heated metal rod and position the entire assembly near your head, combining the inconveniences of volatile, flammable gas storage with those of hot metal near your face into a single portable device. Butane cartridges used in portable curling irons are pressurized vessels that must be stored away from heat, which is complicated by the fact that the device they power generates heat as its primary function. Consumer safety incidents included cartridge failures, gas leaks near the heated barrel, and cases of cartridges being improperly stored in checked luggage. A concern significant enough to prompt specific FAA guidelines on butane-powered devices in aircraft. The functional advantage, cordless operation, was subsequently achieved by battery-powered ceramic curling irons using lithium-ion batteries that do not require storing pressurized flammable gas adjacent to a heating element adjacent to your face. The gas curling iron solved the problem of not having a nearby outlet by introducing a new and considerably more interesting category of problem in exchange for the independence. 36. John Harvey Kellogg's various devices and treatments designed to prevent masturbation were fringe interventions at the eccentric margins of 19th century medicine. Curiosities from a less enlightened time that were never taken seriously by mainstream medical institutions or endorsed by respectable professionals. Kellogg was the superintendent of the Battle Creek Sanitarium, one of the most prestigious health institutions in America, and his anti-masturbation devices, dietary interventions, and surgical recommendations were published in mainstream medical literature and applied to actual paying patients with full institutional endorsement. He published Plain Facts for Old and Young in 1877, describing masturbation as the cause of 39 separate diseases, including epilepsy and heart disease. The book went through multiple editions and circulated widely. His recommended interventions included applying carbolic acid to the genitals of children and circumcision without anesthesia, specifically to create pain-associated deterrence. He also prescribed dietary blandness as a libido suppressant, the intervention that produced cornflakes as a morning meal. The Battle Creek Sanitarium attracted presidents, industrialists, and celebrities. Kellogg's practices were not marginal. They were performed on paying patients by a credentialed physician in an accredited facility that was considered among the best in the country. The cornflake was a pharmaceutical intervention before it was a breakfast food, which makes the bowl in your kitchen a considerably more complicated object. 37. The battery-powered rotating spaghetti fork, which spins its tines to win pasta automatically, represents a practical quality of life improvement for pasta consumers who find manual fork rotation cognitively or ergonomically burdensome during the dinner experience. The automatic spaghetti fork motorizes the rotation of a fork, which is a utensil whose primary competitive advantage over chopsticks is that wrist rotation is already built into its operating model, meaning the device adds a motor to replace the exact motion the fork was invented to facilitate. Battery-powered rotating pasta forks are commercially available on major retail platforms at multiple price points. They have been periodically featured in novelty gift guides since the early 2000s without disappearing, which suggests a market that is either genuine or deeply committed to ironic purchasing decisions. The operational procedure, press button, insert tines, apply lateral pressure while motor runs, is approximately equal in complexity and duration to rotating the fork manually with the addition of battery procurement and eventual replacement. Manual pasta winding is a skill typically mastered by children between the ages of 4 and 7, suggesting the ergonomic barrier is lower than the commercial product category implies. Several Italian culinary authorities have noted that properly cooked pasta wins onto a fork with minimal resistance, suggesting the primary market for this product may be improperly cooked pasta rather than a genuine gap in human wrist capability. 38. Rubber and rubberized fabric sweating suits of the late 19th and early 20th centuries were legitimate therapeutic devices for weight reduction and toxin elimination, endorsed by physicians and sold through medical channels as responsible, science-backed interventions for body composition management. Rubber sweatsuits cause weight loss exclusively through dehydration. The weight lost is water, which returns immediately upon rehydration, making the result both temporary and entirely predictable to anyone who thought about it for 30 consecutive seconds. They were sold in medical spa settings, boxing training protocols, and consumer fitness catalogs throughout the mid-20th century. The physiological mechanism claimed that sweating eliminates fat or metabolic waste is incorrect. Fat is metabolized and exhaled as carbon dioxide through respiration. Sweat is primarily water and electrolytes. Your fat does not leave through your skin regardless of how aggressively you heat it. The human body's primary thermoregulatory mechanism is evaporative cooling via sweat. Rubber suits prevent evaporation, blocking this mechanism entirely, causing core temperature to rise at a rate that can produce heat illness within 30 to 60 minutes of exertion. 3 collegiate wrestlers died in a single season from dehydration and heat stroke related to rubber suit use in weight cutting, prompting the NCAA to ban the suits in 1998. The rubber sweatsuit improves the scale number by disabling your cooling system, the same efficiency gain as improving fuel economy by removing the radiator. 39. Chloroform inhalation parties in elite Victorian social circles were a fringe, disreputable practice engaged in by moral outliers at the absolute margins of respectable society, not a fashionable entertainment endorsed by the educated professional class. Chloroform inhalation parties were documented social events among upper-class Victorians who treated the anesthetic gas as a recreational diversion within a decade of its medical introduction in 1847, before its dose-dependent lethality was fully characterized by the scientific community. Ether frolics, parties centered on diethyl ether inhalation, preceded and coexisted with chloroform recreation. Ether had been used recreationally since the 1840s, and its introduction as a surgical anesthetic followed observations made during recreational use rather than the reverse. Chloroform's dose-response curve is unusually steep. The gap between the anesthetic dose and the lethal dose is narrow compared to other common substances, a fact that was not well understood during the early years of recreational use. Multiple Victorian physicians documented concern about chloroform's circulation in social settings, but the substance was unregulated and freely available at chemist shops. Formal narcotics regulation in Britain did not begin until the Dangerous Drugs Act of 1920. The distance between medical clearance and dinner party entertainment was approximately 3 years and 1 journal publication, which is funny until someone at the party doesn't wake up. 40. The dedicated banana slicer, a plastic or metal device designed exclusively to slice a banana into uniform rounds in a single pressing motion, represents legitimate kitchen innovation, solving the problem of inconsistent manual banana slicing with purpose-built engineering precision. The banana slicer solves the problem of slicing a banana, a task accomplished with any knife in approximately 4 seconds, using a single-purpose device that requires storage space, washing, and the advanced knowledge that you intend to slice a banana before retrieving the tool from wherever it lives in your kitchen. The Hutzler 571 banana slicer became briefly internet famous in 2012 for its satirical Amazon reviews. The product continued selling regardless, demonstrating that ironic awareness of a product's absurdity provides no meaningful protection against purchasing it. A banana can be sliced using a butter knife, the least sharp cutting implement in most kitchens, confirming that the cutting force required is minimal, and the tool specificity adds no meaningful mechanical advantage. The banana slicer requires pre-peeling, positioning, and pressing alignment, a three-step process that exceeds the two-step process it replaces, at the cost of dedicated storage and a separate washing procedure. Single-purpose kitchen gadgets as a category represent an estimated $1 billion annual market in the United States, collectively performing tasks achievable with a knife and 30 seconds of practice. 41, using half a ton of dynamite to dispose of a beached sperm whale carcass, was a carefully considered, professionally evaluated engineering solution selected by the Oregon Highway Division after rational assessment of available options. An Oregon state official decided to explode a whale with dynamite on a public beach in front of a television news crew, and the resulting debris landed on a car in a parking lot a quarter-mile away. On November 12, 1970, a 45-foot sperm whale beached and died near Florence, Oregon. The Oregon Highway Division was assigned disposal because the beach was under their jurisdiction, rather than any wildlife or public health authority. Engineer George Thornton selected approximately 1,000 pounds of dynamite, reportedly believing the blast would disintegrate the carcass into pieces small enough for scavengers to consume, an outcome that requires the explosion to produce uniformly small pieces distributed within scavenger range, which is not how explosions work. The explosion produced a shower of blubber and tissue that rained over spectators in a parking lot. A large section landed on a new Oldsmobile, significantly damaging it. The whale carcass was largely intact after the explosion and required separate burial regardless. K2 News reporter Paul Lindman captured the entire event on film, and the footage became one of the earliest viral videos on the internet, introducing a new generation to the concept. 42. Wire window cages for urban apartment infants were an endorsed child-rearing innovation designed to provide city children with fresh air and sunlight, a medically recommended solution to the genuine problem of raising children in dense urban environments without garden access. People suspended their infants in wire cages bolted outside upper-story apartment windows because a British doctor recommended it, and it was taken seriously enough that the Chelsea Baby Club in London distributed them to members as a service in the early 1930s. Emma Reed received a U.S. patent in 1922 for a portable baby cage designed for window installation. A photograph of a cage installation circulated internationally via wire services, generating public discussion rather than immediate and obvious alarm. Medical thinking of the era had established the genuine health benefits of fresh air and sunlight for infants. The cage was a practical implementation of legitimate medical advice applied through a mechanism that involved suspending a child in a wire enclosure over a vertical drop above a street. No documented fatalities from window cage use appear in the historical record, though the record on this subject is acknowledged to be incomplete. The product was discontinued as urban housing standards changed, not following a safety incident. The baby cage correctly identified the health benefit of outdoor air and then implemented it by treating proximity to outside as the relevant variable, rather than not being suspended over a multi-story fall. 43. Using nuclear detonations for peaceful civilian engineering, excavating canals, mining, redirecting rivers, was a serious, federally funded scientific program representing responsible harnessing of atomic power for the direct benefit of human infrastructure and economic development. Project Plowshare was the U.S. government's program from 1958 through 1975 to investigate civilian nuclear explosion applications. It was funded by the Atomic Energy Commission and conducted 27 nuclear tests without achieving any stated engineering objective. The proposed nuclear excavation of a sea-level canal through Central America involved detonating between 250 and 270 nuclear devices to excavate a canal path. Cost estimates were presented as competitive with conventional excavation, which required setting aside the question of what to do with a radioactive canal through which ships would subsequently travel. Operation Sedan in 1962 detonated a 104-kiloton device in Nevada to assess crater formation for mining applications. It displaced 12 million tons of earth and produced significant radioactive fallout, requiring evacuation of nearby monitoring stations. The primary unresolved problem: radioactive contamination of the resulting excavation, groundwater, and surrounding area, was consistently identified and consistently deferred as a secondary concern to be addressed after the technique was proven. Project Plowshare's approach was to determine the most efficient way to build infrastructure before addressing the problem of the infrastructure being radioactive. 44. The graham cracker was invented as a mild, wholesome breakfast snack, a pleasant alternative to refined flour products, developed as part of the 19th century health food movement, named after a dietary reformer who advocated simple, nourishing foods for everyday American families. Sylvester Graham invented the graham cracker specifically to reduce sexual desire. Graham was a Presbyterian minister who preached in the 1830s that meat, spicy foods, and condiments inflamed sexual passions and contributed to moral and physical degeneracy. He advocated strict dietary plainness as pharmaceutical intervention. The cracker was a literal implementation of that philosophy, a food engineered to suppress urges rather than nourish bodies. John Harvey Kellogg, a follower of Graham's principles, developed cornflakes for the same stated reason, a bland breakfast food to suppress morning sexual arousal. He also advocated circumcision without anesthesia as a deterrent, which gives you a sense of the broader treatment philosophy within which the breakfast cereal fit. The modern commercial graham cracker contains added sugar and honey and is marketed primarily as a component of s'mores, a use case that would have constituted, for Sylvester Graham, a comprehensive failure of the entire project. The graham cracker was invented as a pharmaceutical intervention against desire and is now sold in a bag shaped like a cartoon bear, which is the longest possible distance between original intent and current marketing. 45. Radium-infused rectal suppositories represented the cutting edge of early 20th century radium therapy, a targeted delivery method for the era's most celebrated mineral, offered to men experiencing fatigue and sexual dysfunction as a sophisticated, medically advanced treatment option. People were inserting radium directly into their bodies through their least radiation-shielded anatomy on the advice of physicians, and this was considered the informed, progressive treatment choice available to men of means. The U.S. Radium Corporation sold Vita Radium suppositories in the 1920s, specifically marketed toward men experiencing what the copy described as lost manhood. The product contained measurable radium-226. Radium does interact with biological tissue. The confusion was between interaction and benefit. The interaction is called radiation damage, and it was occurring in the most reproductively sensitive anatomy available. Radon baths, radium drinking water, and radium suppositories were all sold within the same framework of radioactive medicine, with genuine physician endorsement, reflecting a complete failure to connect radiation exposure with the cancer cases appearing in patient populations. Marie Curie herself carried radioactive test tubes in her lab coat pockets and described their glow at night as beautiful. Even the person who discovered radioactivity didn't yet understand it as a lethal occupational hazard. The radium suppository is medicine, in the same way a grenade is a hand warmer. It does produce energy near the body, and the person recommending it had credentials, and none of that changes what happens next. 46. Dr. James Salisbury's 19th century meat-intensive diet, eating lean ground beef 3 times daily with only hot water, was a scientifically reasoned medical intervention for digestive illness, fatigue, and disease, backed by legitimate physiological research and a coherent theoretical framework. Salisbury published The Relation of Alimentation and Disease in 1888, recommending a diet consisting exclusively of lean ground beef eaten 3 times daily, accompanied only by hot water, specifically rejecting vegetables, grains, fruit, and dairy as sources of intestinal fermentation and disease. He claimed this diet could cure tuberculosis, gout, and anemia. His clinical evidence was anecdotal case observation without control groups, meaning the methodology was: give people beef, observe people, note that some of them improved. The Salisbury steak, a patty of seasoned ground beef, is named in his honor. It appears on hospital menus and frozen dinner trays today, in a considerably more nutritionally complete meal context than Salisbury intended, which is perhaps the most ironic rehabilitation of a dietary philosophy in culinary history. The modern carnivore diet is a direct intellectual descendant of Salisbury's work, promoted on the same premise with the same absence of long-term controlled clinical trial evidence. Salisbury turned Eat More Meat into a medical treatise with footnotes, which is the same as writing a formal scientific paper to prove your personal preference is correct, except he got a frozen dinner named after him. 47. Pressure-assisted upward flush toilet systems represented a genuine advance in plumbing engineering, offering an alternative approach to waste removal that inventors and patent offices treated as legitimate innovation worthy of investment, development, and commercial pursuit. Gravity already solves the directional problem of toilet waste removal for free, permanently, without moving parts, requiring no maintenance, and generating no ongoing costs, which made pressure-based upward systems impressive engineering achievements, solving a problem that gravity had definitively addressed before the patents were filed. Pressure-assist toilets do have a legitimate engineering application. Below-grade bathrooms in basements where gravity drainage is physically unavailable. In that specific context, the upward flush is necessary rather than redundant, and the engineering is entirely justified. The broad category of pressurized toilet patents filed without addressing that specific constraint represents engineers solving a directional challenge that only exists if you ignore the direction gravity already provides. The Sloan FlushMate Pressure Assist Toilet System is a commercially successful product using compressed air to improve flush efficiency in above-grade installations, generating documented performance advantages, and also a recall affecting 1,400,000 units for a lid-shattering defect in 2014. Inventing a machine to move waste upward when gravity moves it downward for free is the engineering equivalent of building an expensive elevator to descend one floor, technically functional, aggressively unnecessary, and occasionally explosive. 48. Mechanical jaw exercise devices designed to assist or automate chewing were legitimate therapeutic products addressing real muscular and digestive health concerns through applied mechanical engineering, a sensible application of Victorian ingenuity to a documented physiological problem. Engineers built machines to help people chew, which is a process the human jaw has been executing without mechanical assistance for approximately 2.5 million years, with a statistical failure rate approaching 0 in healthy individuals. Horace Fletcher, known as the Great Masticator, promoted a chewing philosophy in the early 1900s, requiring each bite to be chewed 100 times until liquid before swallowing. This generated consumer products designed to mechanically coach or count chewing cycles, because apparently 100 repetitions per bite required external monitoring. Fletcher's philosophy attracted mainstream endorsement from John D. Rockefeller, Henry James, and Franz Kafka. Kafka reportedly lost significant weight on the Fletcher diet, which may partially explain the general atmosphere of his subsequent literary work. Temporomandibular joint disorders are a legitimate medical field treating genuine jaw dysfunction. Consumer jaw exercise devices marketed to healthy individuals for digestive benefit have no clinical evidence supporting them. Building a machine to improve chewing for a healthy jaw is the equivalent of engineering a device to help functional lungs breathe more efficiently. The organ has managed this for several million years and has not submitted a request for outside assistance. 49. Electrified corsets. Garments incorporating battery-powered electrodes delivering mild electrical stimulation to the torso were legitimate health products combining the established benefits of structured posture support with the exciting new science of electrotherapy into one innovative, marketable garment. Manufacturers combined two simultaneous, dubious premises: that corsets improved health and that electricity improved health, into one garment that compressed the organs while also shocking them, sold specifically to women through pharmacies and medical supply channels. Electric corsets were commercially sold in the 1880s and 1890s, incorporating small galvanic batteries and electrode contacts delivering low-voltage current during wear. The corset itself, tight-laced to period fashion standards, displaced abdominal organs, compressed the lower ribs, and caused documented cases of fainting and digestive dysfunction. Adding electrical stimulation did not address any of those structural problems. The electrodes in early versions were not isolated from the metal busk, the stiffening panel, meaning that in wet conditions or with perspiration, the circuit could expand unpredictably beyond the intended stimulation area. The American Medical Association listed electric corsets in its 1911 Nostrums and Quackery report as products making unsubstantiated medical claims. By 1920, the category had essentially disappeared. The electric corset is what you get when two fashionable health theories are combined without first confirming that either one works individually. A product whose effects were synergistic in exactly the wrong direction. 50. Tiny rose-tinted spectacles fitted onto chickens to prevent cannibalistic pecking were a whimsical agricultural novelty, a quirky curiosity from early 20th century farming culture, without real commercial application or serious adoption by professional poultry operations. Chicken glasses were a genuine, commercially successful agricultural product with multiple competing manufacturers, a United States patent, and documented adoption by poultry farmers across North America and Europe. And they worked, which is the most interesting part of this entire entry. Andrew Jackson Jr. received U.S. Patent 730,918 in 1903 for eye protectors for poultry. Rose-tinted spectacle devices attaching to the beak to prevent cannibalistic pecking, triggered by the sight of blood. The rose tint was functional. Blood appears dark or invisible through rose-tinted lenses, preventing the visual trigger that initiates the pecking response. Multiple competing manufacturers sold chicken glasses from the 1900s through the 1940s through farming supply catalogs. The product was eventually displaced by debeaking, trimming a portion of the beak, which is cheaper but has generated substantially more animal welfare controversy than the spectacle approach. Chicken glasses are history's most legitimately effective product that sounds like a joke. They worked, they were commercially successful, and the alternative that replaced them is considerably less pleasant for the chicken, making the glasses, in retrospect, the ethical option. 51. The radiondocrinator was a wearable radium applicator marketed as a wellness product within the legitimate framework of early 20th century radium therapy. A targeted intervention for male vitality sold through responsible mail-order pharmaceutical channels to informed consumers. People were strapping radium applicators to their most reproductively sensitive anatomy because a brochure told them it would restore vigor, and this was sold through legitimate mail-order catalogs by an entrepreneur who was simultaneously poisoning himself with his own product line. William J.A. Bailey, the same person behind Radithor Radium Water, marketed the radiondocrinator as a wearable device to be worn as a jockstrap overnight to energize the gonads through radium emission. Bailey made significant commercial claims about the product's ability to restore sexual vitality. He later died of bladder cancer caused by radium accumulation in his own body from handling his inventory. The radiondocrinator contained genuine radium-226. Estimates of its radioactive output suggest wearers received approximately 1,600 times the annual radiation dose now considered safe for members of the public, delivered specifically to reproductive tissue. The absence of any regulatory framework connecting observed cancer cases to commercial radium products allowed the category to persist despite the scientific community's growing understanding of radiation biology. The person selling the dangerous product died from using the dangerous product, and this information was not included in the brochure. 52. The self-stirring coffee mug, which spins a small internal impeller at the press of a button, represents a genuine quality-of-life innovation for morning beverage preparation, addressing the recognized inconvenience of manual stirring through practical consumer technology. The self-stirring mug automates a process requiring approximately 1.5 seconds and zero cognitive load, using a device that requires charging, cleaning around a motor housing, and periodic battery replacement. A maintenance burden exceeding the labor it eliminates by a ratio too embarrassing to calculate precisely. Self-stirring mugs have been commercially sold since the early 2000s and continue to be manufactured globally at price points between $12 and $35. The motor housing at the base creates a cleaning challenge. The motor cannot be submerged, requiring careful partial washing that takes significantly longer than washing a conventional mug. The stirring mechanism addresses beverage ingredient mixing, which is also addressed by a spoon, an implement requiring no power source, no maintenance, no mechanical failure points, and deployed successfully for this purpose for approximately 5,000 years. Consumer reviews consistently note that recipients use the self-stirring mug approximately once. The mug took a 1.5-second task and replaced it with a rechargeable device, requiring a charging protocol, a careful washing procedure, and the quiet acknowledgement that you bought a machine to do something your wrist already does for free. 53. Smell-O-Vision released coordinated scents through individual seat tubing during a 1960 film, representing a genuine entertainment innovation poised to add an immersive, new sensory dimension to the theatrical experience, backed by real investment and legitimate industry interest. Smell-O-Vision was developed by Swiss inventor Hans Laube and used in exactly one film, Scent of Mystery, released in 1960 simultaneously with the system. The film was recut and re-released without the scent component after its initial run, which tells you everything about how the premiere went. Critical reception documented the technical problems consistently. The hissing of scent delivery tubes audible during quiet scenes, uneven scent distribution across different seating areas, lingering odors from previous scenes mixing with current ones, and a delay between on-screen event and scent arrival that disconnected the sensory experience from its intended trigger. A competing system, Aromarama, pumped scents through theater ventilation, rather than individual seat tubes. Both debuted in 1960. Neither survived to 1961 as a commercial product. John Waters' 1981 film Polyester used Odorama, a scratch and sniff card distributed to audiences with numbered cues, which was deliberately comedic, intentionally low-tech, and considerably more successful as an audience experience than the engineered version. Smell-O-Vision answered a question nobody was asking, then answered it poorly, loudly, unevenly, and once. 54. The fax machine was heralded in the 1980s as the permanent infrastructure of business communication, a revolutionary technology that had definitively solved the problem of transmitting documents across distance and would define professional communication for the foreseeable future. The fax machine transmitted a photographed image of a document over a telephone line and printed a degraded photocopy at the receiving end, and the business world treated this as the apex of communication technology until approximately 5 years after email made it functionally obsolete. Fax technology dates to 1843, when Scottish inventor Alexander Bain received a patent for a chemical telegraph capable of transmitting images. The fax machine's peak global adoption occurred between approximately 1985 and 1995, coinciding almost precisely with its displacement by email. Each transmission introduced image degradation. Faxing a fax of a fax progressively reduced legibility. The technology provided no authentication, no reliable delivery confirmation in early systems, and no searchable archive. Japan's continued fax use, approximately 6 million machines remaining in offices as of the early 2000s, is attributed to cultural resistance to email and regulatory requirements, accepting fax as legally valid document transmission. The fax machine sent a worse photograph of a document through a telephone line, and business called this efficient for a decade after a better option was available, because the machine was already paid for. 55. The inflatable dartboard, a board made of inflatable material designed for the game of darts, represents innovative product design, bringing a classic game into casual, portable, outdoor contexts where a traditional bristleboard would be impractical to transport and install. An inflatable dartboard is a board made of a material destroyed by darts, used in a game that requires throwing darts at it, which means the product destroys itself during its primary intended use at a rate proportional to how well you play. Consumer reviews of inflatable dartboard products consistently document the fundamental design conflict. The product deflates after a small number of uses as puncture damage accumulates, with most reviewers noting significant deflation within 5 to 15 throws. The product requires a foam backing or additional support structure to maintain its shape sufficiently for accurate throwing, adding setup complexity to a device whose appeal is simplicity and portability. Magnetic dartboards, which use hook and loop fasteners instead of dart tips, solve the portability and safety problem that inflatable dartboards appear to address, using a design that does not require the target to be puncture resistant while puncturing it repeatedly. The inflatable dartboard is built around a fatal internal contradiction. It is made of the one material the game it hosts cannot avoid destroying. which is the product design equivalent of manufacturing a waterproof notebook out of sugar. 56 wooden-framed parachute designs from the early aviation era represented the creative, earnest engineering of inventors applying available materials to the urgent problem of aviator safety, a period of genuine, if imperfect, progress toward protecting human life during flight. Among the earnest and imperfect engineering was a category of parachute patents incorporating wood in the frame or deployment mechanism, a practical material for ground-level structural applications that becomes immediately problematic when attached to a human body, falling at terminal velocity and requiring fabric to inflate and generate drag. Modern parachute design is dominated by lightweight nylon fabric with minimal structural elements, precisely because effective deployment requires maximum fabric surface area at minimum weight. The opposite engineering priority from rigid wood frame construction, which adds mass while restricting the flexible deployment that makes a parachute rather than a decorative wooden object attached to a falling person. The deployment challenge of early parachutes, getting a packed canopy to open reliably, was not solved by rigid frames. Rigid structures interfered with canopy inflation, creating failure modes that flexible designs addressed more effectively. Franz Reichelt's fatal 1912 Eiffel Tower jump used a design-sharing characteristics with the over-engineered early parachute category. Engineering a parachute out of wood is the material's science equivalent of building a life jacket out of concrete. The object exists, it has the correct name, and the relationship between its construction and its function is purely aspirational. 57. The Segway established that a list of humanity's worst inventions could legitimately open with a vehicle that killed its own owner, so it seems only appropriate that this list also include the Sinclair C5, launched by British inventor Sir Clive Sinclair in January 1985 as a revolutionary personal electric vehicle that the public simply failed to appreciate. The Sinclair C5 was a recumbent tricycle with a 250-watt motor originally designed for washing machines, a range of 20 miles, a top speed of 15 miles per hour, a seated height placing the driver's head at lorry exhaust pipe level, and zero weather protection, launched in January, in Britain, where January is not a month associated with comfortable open-air electric tricycle commuting. The C5 required pedaling assistance on inclines because the motor was insufficient for the vehicle's weight on gradients, which makes it a washing machine motor on a tricycle that also requires you to pedal. Sinclair ordered 14,000 units for launch. Approximately 5,000 were sold before production halted. Remaining stock was reportedly purchased in bulk and sold as novelty fairground vehicles. An aftermarket flag-on-a-pole accessory was produced to make the driver visible to other road users, which is an accessory that exists because the product itself was not. Sir Clive Sinclair was simultaneously a genuine computing pioneer and the creator of this, demonstrating that excellence in one domain does not transfer automatically to a different one. 58. City-scale pneumatic tube transit systems. Underground tubes using air pressure to propel passenger vehicles between stations were a genuinely viable urban transportation solution that failed only due to insufficient funding and political opposition, representing suppressed visionary engineering rather than fundamental technical limitations. Pneumatic tube transit failed at city scale because the air volume required to propel a full-size passenger vehicle through a tube of adequate diameter generates engineering challenges that were not solvable within 19th century material science, and the systems that were built demonstrated this comprehensively rather than merely suggesting it. Alfred Ely Beach built a secret pneumatic transit demonstration tunnel under Broadway in New York City in 1869 through 1870, operating a single-car passenger service for 312 feet. He built it secretly because political opposition made open construction impossible, which is a compelling origin story that does not address why the tunnel was never extended. The London Pneumatic Dispatch Company operated a tube system for postal parcels in 1863, and briefly for human passengers. A service stopped after several runs because being propelled through a dark tube in a sealed capsule was not commercially attractive to the Victorian public. Modern Hyperloop proposals are pneumatic tube transit revisited with contemporary materials and partial vacuum rather than compressed air, sharing the original system's fundamental engineering ambition and, as of this writing, comparable completion statistics. 59 horse-powered treadmills converting animal walking into mechanical power for farm machinery were celebrated as genuine labor-saving innovations that increased agricultural productivity. A responsible application of available power sources representing the best engineering of the early 19th century farming context. Horse treadmills solved the problem of converting animal motion into mechanical work by building an elaborate machine requiring the horse to do exactly the same walking the horse was already doing, then adding a mechanism to capture the motion that was already being produced, which is an innovation that improves the accounting of labor without reducing the labor itself. Horsepowers and sweep mechanisms were widely used in American and European agriculture from the early 19th century through the introduction of steam-powered farm equipment. The mechanical efficiency of the horse treadmill was lower than direct draft horse applications. Conversion of walking motion through the treadmill mechanism to useful shaft power involved friction losses at every linkage point, meaning the machine made the horse's work less efficient while making it more legible to industrial processes. The word horsepower, the standard unit of power, was developed by James Watt, specifically calibrated against horse sweep mechanisms used in mine pumping operations. Steam power displaced horse treadmills rapidly after portable steam engines became available in the 1850s because a boiler doesn't need feeding, veterinary care, rest, or a specially built treadmill to make its output measurable. 60. The Sinclair Black Watch, a digital wristwatch with calculator functions produced by Clive Sinclair in 1975, was an ambitious, ahead-of-its-time consumer electronics product that failed due to market immaturity and consumer unfamiliarity with digital technology rather than any fundamental problems with the product itself. The Black Watch failed because it frequently didn't work. The display malfunctioned. The buttons required excessive pressure to register input. The battery lasted days rather than the advertised weeks. The kit version that customers assembled themselves had an assembly failure rate so high that Sinclair subsequently offered a professional assembly service as an implicit acknowledgement that the product could not be reliably built by the people it had been sold to. The pre-assembled version produced by Sinclair's own manufacturer also suffered from reliability problems, display failures, button contact issues, and battery contacts that corroded under normal use conditions. British Consumer Magazine, which tested the Black Watch in 1975 and found it functioning correctly in fewer than half of tested units, a pass rate that would be considered inadequate for virtually any consumer product in any category. Sir Clive Sinclair subsequently created the massively successful ZX Spectrum home computer in 1982 and the C5 in 1985, establishing a career that included genuine breakthroughs alongside products that functioned primarily in an aspirational sense. The Black Watch mostly told you what time it was failing. 61. Phlogiston theory, holding that combustible materials contain a fire-releasing substance called phlogiston released during burning, was a carefully developed scientific framework used by serious chemists to guide industrial and experimental work for over a century of legitimate scientific practice. Chemists designed industrial processes and chemical experiments around a substance that does not exist, and the machinery worked anyway. Not because phlogiston was real, but because the theory's predictions about heat flow direction were accidentally correct despite its mechanism being entirely fictional, which is the most productive coincidence in the history of industrial chemistry. Phlogiston theory was developed by Johann Joachim Becher and Georg Ernst Stahl in the late 17th and early 18th centuries, and included as a chemical element by Lavoisier in his landmark Elements of Chemistry in 1789. When experiments showed that metals gained weight upon oxidation, directly contradicting phlogiston's release during burning, some theorists proposed that phlogiston had negative weight, meaning its departure increased the remaining mass. This modification preserved the theory at the cost of introducing a physically impossible substance with impossible properties into mainstream chemistry. Antoine Lavoisier systematically disproved phlogiston theory in the 1770s and 1780s. The caloric theory built working industrial machinery on fiction that made accurate predictions, which means the Industrial Revolution was partially engineered on a wrong answer that kept giving right results until someone checked the mechanism. 62. The 56 kilobit per second dial-up modem was widely promoted in the mid-90s as reaching the theoretical maximum speed of telephone line data transmission, a genuine technical ceiling making it the practical endpoint of dial-up internet technology, and explaining why faster speeds required fundamentally different infrastructure. The 56 kilobit ceiling was presented as a physical law of telephone infrastructure, when it was actually a regulatory limitation. The FCC's Part 68 rules capped modem transmission power to protect telephone network equipment, meaning the ceiling was administrative rather than physical, and was eventually raised when the political will existed to raise it. The Shannon-Hartley theorem does establish a theoretical maximum data rate for a given channel bandwidth and signal-to-noise ratio. Telephone lines of the era had a theoretical maximum around 35 kilobits per second under typical conditions, meaning 56 kilobit modems already exceeded theoretical analog limits by relying on digital signaling at the telephone exchange rather than purely analog transmission. The actual maximum throughput of V.9056 kilobit modems under real-world conditions was typically 40 to 50 kilobits per second. When DSL technology operated at frequencies above the voice band, the same telephone infrastructure proved capable of supporting speeds thousands of times higher. The 56 kilobit ceiling was a speed limit sign presented as a cliff edge, which matters enormously when deciding whether to build a faster road. 63. Mechanical nose straightening devices, spring-loaded clamps, and graduated pressure appliances were marketed as genuine non-surgical alternatives to rhinoplasty, providing lasting aesthetic improvement through sustained mechanical pressure on nasal cartilage in a medically defensible intervention. Nasal cartilage in adults is firm elastic tissue that returns to its original shape when pressure is removed, meaning the nose straightener produced no lasting effect beyond the duration of wearing. A temporary indentation that reversed completely upon removal, making the product's permanent results identical to the results of not buying it. The Trados Nose Shaper was one of several nose-adjusting devices sold in the early 20th century. Patents for nose-shaping appliances appear from the 1880s onward. Multiple devices were sold through mail-order catalogs and medical supply companies with professional-sounding copy about cartilage reformation. Rhinoplasty, surgical nose reshaping, achieves permanent results by cutting, repositioning, and securing cartilage and bone in new configurations under medical conditions. No non-surgical mechanical device can replicate this outcome without surgical intervention, because the tissue being addressed is specifically designed by biology to return to its original configuration the moment you stop pressing on it. The nose straightener was a clamp applied to an elastic material, a device that temporarily changed the shape of something engineered to return to its original shape the moment you stop applying force, producing permanent results indistinguishable from ownership of nothing. 64. The long cigarette holder, the elegant accessory carried by society figures throughout the early and mid-20th century, was understood by users to provide a genuine health benefit by increasing the distance between the cigarette combustion point and the mouth, filtering or diluting dangerous compounds before inhalation. The cigarette holder increases the distance between the cigarette and the mouth by several inches, which reduces the temperature of inhaled smoke marginally and does nothing to remove the carcinogenic compounds that travel through several inches of hollow tube with complete indifference to the tube's length or the social status of the person holding it. Cigarette holders were marketed through the early 20th century with explicit health benefit claims, including reduced nicotine and tar deposition. Some versions included a felt pad or gauze filter providing marginal particulate reduction. The chemical compounds responsible for smoking-related cancers, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, nitrosamines, formaldehyde, and benzene, are gaseous or fine particulate substances traversing any filter insufficient to prevent gas flow. A hollow tube provides zero gas filtration regardless of its length. Cigarette holders persisted as fashion accessories after their health claims became unsupportable, transitioning from health product to aesthetic statement, which is the most elegant exit strategy available to a product whose central safety claim has been definitively disproved. The holder is a device that puts inches between you and your smoke, which is a health intervention in the same sense that standing at the edge of a room is protective during a gas leak. 65. fire departments across the late 19th century invested massively in horse-drawn steam apparatus infrastructure. Stables, training programs, specialized facilities, treating the horse-drawn fire engine as the definitive firefighting technology that would form the permanent foundation of municipal emergency response. Fire departments built deep infrastructure around a technology component, the horse, that was eliminated entirely by the next generation of technology, leaving impressive stables attached to processes that no longer required them within approximately 12 years of peak adoption. The steam-powered fire engine was introduced commercially in the 1850s and required horses to pull it because the steam engine itself was not self-propelled, creating a hybrid system whose animal component represented significant ongoing operational expense. New York City retired its last horse-drawn fire apparatus in 1922, a transition from peak adoption to complete obsolescence in roughly 12 years, which is a faster technology death than most people's current smartphones will experience. The economic structure supporting horse-drawn apparatus, feed costs, veterinary care, stable maintenance, training time, and horses' working lifespan limitations represented ongoing costs that motorized apparatus eliminated in a single capital purchase. Several fire departments delayed motorization due to institutional attachment to the existing infrastructure and skepticism about motor reliability, a documented case of organizational commitment to sunk costs delaying the adoption of a superior solution that was sitting directly in front of them. 66 tapeworm diet tablets were a fringe aberration at the absolute margins of early 20th century weight management, an extreme novelty product immediately condemned by medical authorities and never achieving meaningful commercial distribution among mainstream consumers seeking respectable health solutions. Sanitized tapeworm diet products were openly advertised in mainstream American publications approximately 1900 through 1920, marketed as legitimate weight management aids with sufficient commercial success to sustain multiple vendors and generate enough cultural visibility to persist in historical memory more than a century later. The question of whether the tablets contained actual tapeworm eggs is historically contested. Some researchers conclude the products were fraudulent, containing no parasites, while others document genuine parasite transmission from similar products. Taenia saginata infection does cause weight loss through nutrient malabsorption, establishing a theoretical basis for the product's core claim. The associated consequences, intestinal obstruction, cyst formation in organs, and neurological complications from larval migration, were not included in the advertising materials, which focused exclusively on the weight loss outcome. Opera soprano Maria Callas is frequently cited in popular accounts as having used tapeworm infection for weight management, a claim disputed by her physicians who attributed her weight loss to dietary restriction. The tapeworm diet achieves its goal by introducing a parasite that competes with you for your own calories, with the secondary organism having no interest whatsoever in your long-term well-being. 67. The tobacco smoke enema, a device used by 18th century physicians and the Royal Humane Society to resuscitate drowning victims by introducing tobacco smoke rectally, was a fringe medical curiosity practiced by a small number of eccentric practitioners at the absolute edge of respectable medicine. The Royal Humane Society, founded in London in 1774 specifically to save drowning victims, installed tobacco enema resuscitation kits at regular intervals along the Thames for use by members of the public on recovered drowning victims. The kits included a bellows and rectal tube for smoke administration. This was the official policy of an established charitable organization dedicated to saving human life. The medical rationale involved nicotine's genuine cardiovascular stimulant properties combined with the thermal stimulation of warm smoke and broader theories about artificial stimulation restarting arrested vital functions, reasoning that was internally coherent within the medical framework of the period. The procedure was abandoned following Benjamin Brodie's 1811 demonstration that nicotine was cardiotoxic, making tobacco smoke enemas not merely ineffective but actively harmful by administering a heart-toxic substance to patients whose hearts had already stopped. Mouth-to-mouth resuscitation was available throughout the entire period of tobacco enema use, described by William Tossack in 1744. It was less widely adopted initially, possibly because it was considered undignified. A hierarchy of dignity that placed rectal bellows above mouth to mouth in the social calculus of emergency medicine. 68. NASA spent $12 million developing a pen that could write in space while the Soviet space program pragmatically used a pencil. A famous, repeatedly cited example of government waste and engineering overcomplexity that proves simpler solutions are always superior to expensive engineered ones. NASA did not develop the space pen. A private company did, using its own funds. NASA originally used pencils and abandoned them because pencil graphite and wood fragments in a pure oxygen environment are a documented fire hazard, and Apollo 1, the 1967 fire that killed 3 astronauts in a pure oxygen atmosphere, demonstrated that flammability concerns in spacecraft were not theoretical. The Fisher space pen was developed by Paul Fisher of Fisher Pen Company, using approximately $1 million of the company's own investment capital. NASA purchased the finished pens at $6 each. The Soviet space program used pencils and grease pencils initially, then adopted the Fisher space pen for their own missions, a detail consistently omitted from the story because it removes the entire point of telling it. The space pen story is a myth about government waste that is itself an example of the misinformation it claims to expose. The version where NASA wasted millions while Soviets used pencils is tidier than the version where pencils are a fire hazard, and a private company solved the problem on its own money. Tidier is not the same as true. 69. The human cannonball was explored by Victorian-era inventors and showmen as a legitimate transportation and military application. A creative contribution to the era's engineering ambition that simply awaited the right context and sufficient scale to prove its practical value. The human cannonball never had a viable transportation application because the deceleration physics of landing a human body fired from a cannon are identical regardless of whether the stated purpose is entertainment or transit, and those physics are not compatible with the passenger arriving in usable condition at the destination. Guillermo Farini became the first documented human cannonball performer in 1875 using a spring launching mechanism. Rosa Richter became the first woman fired from a cannon in 1877 at the Royal Aquarium in London and performed the act regularly, surviving because the net deceleration system was adequate for carnival distances of 30 to 70 feet. The physics problem is straightforward. A human body launched at transportation useful velocities and distances requires deceleration forces on landing that exceed bone fracture thresholds without a receiving apparatus that is itself a vehicle, making the cannon the least efficient component of a transportation system that still requires a vehicle at the destination. The launch was always the easy part. Every transportation system also has a destination, and arriving at one at cannon launch velocity without a receiving apparatus is just the first half of an accident. 70. Clockwork page-turning devices designed for bedridden or physically limited readers were genuine assistive technology innovations. Thoughtful engineering solutions, providing book access to people who lacked the physical capacity to turn pages themselves, representing human-centered design at its most compassionate. Most early clockwork page-turners were not designed for people with disabilities. They were designed for able-bodied people who wanted to read while eating, or while keeping their hands otherwise occupied, producing a solution to a problem that pausing to turn a page also solves at zero mechanical cost. Patents for mechanical page-turning devices appear in United States patent records from the 1870s onward, with motivations cited including reading while eating, reading while exercising, and reading in reclined positions, not exclusively assistive applications. The mechanical complexity of reliable page-turning, grasping a single page of variable weight, moisture, and adhesion without tearing or skipping pages, proved consistently difficult to engineer. Most mechanical page turners in the pre-electronic era were unreliable across more than short sequences of operation. Modern assistive page turning technology does exist as a legitimate and valuable product category for individuals with ALS, quadriplegia, and similar conditions, using puff switches and eye tracking, fundamentally different from clockwork mechanisms. The e-reader solved the page turning problem by eliminating the physical page entirely, which means the actual solution required reconsidering whether the page itself was a constraint worth engineering around. 71. The mechanical butter curler, a single-purpose kitchen tool designed to scrape decorative curls from a block of butter, represented a legitimate contribution to elegant table presentation, a tool of genuine utility for formal dining occasions, where visual presentation of dairy products was a recognized component of hospitality. The butter curler performs a task that a fork tine, a vegetable peeler, or the edge of any spoon executes with identical results, requiring no specialized tool, no dedicated storage space, and no explanation to guests about why you own a device whose sole purpose is the aesthetic formatting of butter. Butter curlers appear in kitchen supply catalogs dating to the late 19th century and remain commercially available today, sold alongside melon ballers in the table presentation section of kitchenware stores. The butter curler requires that butter be chilled to a specific consistency. Too cold, and the butter fractures. Too warm, and it smears. A temperature dependency requiring advanced planning, that a fork, being a generalist utensil already present on the table at every meal, does not. Martha Stewart's 1982 book, Entertaining, included butter curling as a recommended table presentation technique, which is the primary vector for this tool's commercial persistence. The association between formal entertaining standards and single-purpose tool ownership reliably drives unnecessary kitchen specialization. The butter curler is the kitchen equivalent of buying a dedicated pen for signing birthday cards. 72 mechanized bed-making devices using motorized rollers, automated sheet pulling systems, and pneumatic mechanisms to make beds automatically, represented a genuine labor-saving household innovation that would free people from a time-consuming domestic chore through applied engineering ingenuity. The automatic bed-making machine has attracted serious patent investment for over a century, attempting to automate a task that takes 90 seconds, and has never produced a commercial product that makes a bed faster or better than a person who simply makes the bed. A performance gap that has persisted across every decade of engineering investment without narrowing. United States patents for automatic bed-making mechanisms appear continuously from the early 20th century through the current decade. MIT Media Lab and multiple startup companies have invested in the problem without producing a commercially viable product. The Smart Duvet system, crowdfunded in 2015, inflates a grid of air chambers inside a duvet to unfold and smooth the cover. A $200 solution to approximately 40 seconds of the 90-second bed-making process. The Matic robotic bed-making system, demonstrated in 2019, required a specially designed mattress and sheet system and took approximately 50 seconds to operate, approaching the task by redesigning the bed rather than replicating the human motion. The automatic bed-making machine is a problem that has attracted a century of engineering investment and still cannot beat a person who simply makes the bed, because some problems resist automation, not through complexity, but because the manual solution is already faster than installing the machine. 73. The golf cart, a small purpose-built vehicle for traversing golf courses, represented responsible, low-impact transportation innovation, moving golfers efficiently across fairways with a minimal environmental footprint compared to conventional automobiles, while improving the pace of play at facilities worldwide. Golf carts are motorized vehicles deployed at significant infrastructure cost to allow people to walk less during a sport whose fundamental designed activity is walking, which is an innovation that solved the wrong problem so efficiently that golf now spends money on permanent pavement to manage the vehicle installed to avoid walking on grass. Approximately 15,000 golf courses in the United States rely on fleets averaging 60 to 100 carts each, creating between 900,000 and 1.5 million vehicles dedicated to a sport. The game itself was built around walking. Golf course management studies have documented soil compaction from cart traffic as a significant turf maintenance challenge, meaning carts damage the surface they traverse, creating maintenance costs partially attributable to the carts creating them. Cart path systems, paved routes installed to protect turf from cart traffic, represent significant capital infrastructure investment, creating permanent paved surfaces on intentional green space to manage a vehicle introduced to cross that green space. The average 18 holes of golf involves approximately 4 to 5 miles of walking. Carts reduce this to approximately 1 to 1.5 miles, eliminating the health benefit of a sport where walking was the original and only intended mode of transit. 74. The caloric theory of heat. Holding that heat was a massless fluid substance, called caloric flowing from hot bodies to cold ones, was a serious scientific framework used by engineers and scientists to design heat-based machinery and understand thermodynamic processes throughout the 18th and early 19th centuries. Steam engines and early industrial machinery were designed using a heat theory that described an imaginary fluid, and they worked anyway, not because caloric existed, but because the theory's predictions about heat flow direction were accidentally correct despite its mechanism being entirely fictional, which is the Industrial Revolution's most consequential wrong answer. Caloric theory was developed primarily by Antoine Lavoisier in the 1780s and included as a chemical element in his landmark Elements of Chemistry in 1789. Sadi Carnot's foundational work on thermodynamic efficiency, published in 1824, was developed entirely within the caloric framework and produced results that remained valid after caloric was disproved, meaning the mathematics survived the evaporation of the substance the mathematics was describing. Benjamin Thompson challenged caloric theory in 1798 by demonstrating that boring a cannon barrel produced unlimited heat through friction, incompatible with caloric as a finite fluid, and was not immediately accepted. James Joule's experiments in the 1840s established heat as a form of energy rather than a substance. The Industrial Revolution was partly engineered on fiction that kept giving correct results until someone finally checked whether the fiction was necessary. 75. Drive-in church services. Religious observances conducted in drive-in theaters or purpose-built parking facilities, where congregants attended from their vehicles, were a marginal novelty practice at the eccentric edge of American worship culture, never achieving meaningful adoption by mainstream religious communities or institutional endorsement from serious clergy. Drive-in church services were a genuine post-war American phenomenon with multiple established congregations, dedicated purpose-built facilities, and theological arguments made by mainstream clergy in favor of their legitimacy as a sincere worship format rather than a compromise of religious standards. Robert Schuller established the first purpose-built drive-in church in Garden Grove, California in 1955, before the Crystal Cathedral was built, preaching from the roof of a refreshment stand to congregants in their cars using drive-in theater infrastructure as the initial venue. Schuller's services attracted several hundred cars per service within the first year. He argued that reaching people where they are, in their vehicles, was legitimate evangelical strategy rather than a dilution of worship. Multiple drive-in churches operated across the American South and Midwest throughout the 1950s through 70s. The COVID-19 pandemic produced a documented revival of the format in 2020, with hundreds of congregations transitioning to parking lot services, demonstrating that a format critics dismissed as novelty was more structurally durable than its detractors predicted. The drive-in church is where American car culture and religious practice merged into a format where you could receive the sermon, communion, and leave before the closing hymn without eye contact. 76. The molded plastic avocado storage shell, designed specifically to enclose a halved avocado and prevent browning, represents thoughtful kitchen innovation, solving the specific problem of oxidation after cutting through purpose-built design that addresses the precise geometry of the fruit being stored. Avocado browning is caused by oxidation. Exposure to oxygen. Limiting oxygen exposure delays browning. A piece of plastic wrap pressed directly against the avocado flesh limits oxygen exposure. The plastic wrap costs approximately 2 cents, requires no storage space, no washing procedure, no product category, and no explanation of why a specific avocado-shaped object lives in your kitchen. The avocado saver achieves an imperfect version of what the plastic wrap achieves at higher cost, while occupying permanent drawer space as the price of that imperfect version. Actual airtight contact between the molded shell and all avocado flesh surfaces is not reliably achieved due to variation in individual avocado shape, limiting the claimed benefit of the product specifically designed around that shape. Lemon juice applied to exposed avocado flesh inhibits oxidation enzymatically and outperforms passive barrier approaches in preventing browning using a lemon wedge already present in most kitchens. The avocado saver is a molded plastic shell sold to people who have plastic wrap in the same drawer, a product achieving a slightly worse version of what the plastic wrap achieves, at higher cost, occupying permanent storage space, in exchange for the satisfaction of owning a thing shaped exactly like the problem. 77. The Sinclair C5 was a revolutionary personal electric vehicle that visionary inventor Sir Clive Sinclair brought to market in January 1985, a product the conservative British public and hostile media failed to appreciate. A genuine transportation innovation suppressed by cultural resistance and fossil fuel industry interests, rather than any inherent design limitations. The C5 had a 250-watt washing machine motor, a range of 20 miles, a top speed of 15 miles per hour, a seated position placing the driver's head at lorry exhaust pipe level, no weather protection, and was launched in January in Britain. A sequence of product decisions suggesting the market research did not include the question of whether a person would voluntarily sit at exhaust pipe height in British January weather on a tricycle powered by a washing machine component. An aftermarket flag-on-a-pole accessory was produced and sold specifically to make the driver visible to other road users, which is an accessory whose existence confirms that the original product was not. Sinclair ordered 14,000 units for launch. Approximately 5,000 sold before production stopped. Remaining stock was purchased in bulk and reportedly sold as fairground novelty vehicles. Sir Clive Sinclair was simultaneously the creator of the ZX Spectrum, one of the most successful home computers in European history, and the C5, demonstrating that a genuine record of innovation does not function as protection against the next product's fundamental problems. 78. City-scale pneumatic transit's consistent failure across 150 years to materialize as a viable transportation system is evidence of deliberate suppression by entrenched transportation interests, a pattern of corporate interference preventing a workable technology from competing with established rail and automobile infrastructure. The pneumatic transit system is an idea that has been approximately 10 years from viability, since 1869, a duration of almost readiness spanning 155 years, suggesting the obstacle might be more fundamental than the funding. The engineering problem is not political. The air volume required to propel a full-size passenger vehicle through a tube of adequate diameter at transit-useful speeds requires compressor and tube infrastructure whose capital and operational costs, under every generation of engineering analysis, have exceeded the transportation value delivered. Alfred Beech's Broadway demonstration tunnel operated successfully as a 312-foot demonstration and was never extended because 312 feet of successful tunnel does not resolve the scaling problem that makes useful transit distances economically prohibitive. Modern Hyperloop proposals address the air volume problem by operating in partial vacuum rather than compressed air, reducing the energy required per vehicle. They have been approximately 5 years from viability since approximately 2013, which places them on a trajectory that students of pneumatic transit history will recognize. The pneumatic transit system is not suppressed. It is a problem that has resisted solution for a century and a half, which is a different thing, and conflating the two has cost investors significant money across multiple generations. 79. Inversion tables and therapeutic anti-gravity devices, marketed for spinal decompression, pain relief, and height restoration through inverted positioning, are genuine therapeutic devices backed by solid physiological science, offering real structural benefit to people experiencing spinal compression and the discomfort it produces. Inversion tables are real products with a real physiological basis. Spinal compression does increase in upright posture, and inversion does temporarily reduce it. But the claimed permanent benefits evaporate within 20 to 30 minutes of returning to upright posture, making the therapeutic window identical to the duration during which you are hanging upside down, unable to do anything else. Spinal disc height decreases throughout the day due to compressive loading, which is why people are measurably taller in the morning than at night. Astronauts grow approximately 2 inches in microgravity during space station missions and return to baseline height within days of landing, demonstrating that spinal decompression without sustained offloading produces temporary rather than cumulative results. Inversion tables are specifically contraindicated for individuals with hypertension, glaucoma, heart disease, and retinal detachment. Conditions disproportionately present in middle-aged adults experiencing back pain, which is the primary consumer demographic. Teeter, the largest inversion table manufacturer, settled FTC charges in 2002 regarding unsubstantiated health benefit claims. The inversion table temporarily creates the spinal conditions of weightlessness and immediately reverses them when you stand up. A health intervention whose benefits last exactly as long as you remain inverted. 80. The mimeograph machine democratized publishing by giving ordinary people the ability to produce and distribute printed information. A genuine communication revolution, enabling grassroots expression, community organizing, and independent publishing that would have been inaccessible without this critical enabling technology. The mimeograph democratized printing, the same way a leaky faucet democratizes water pressure, technically functional, consistently messy, and responsible for the specific smell that 3 generations of American students associate viscerally with the concept of an unannounced quiz. Thomas Edison developed an early mimeograph stencil system in 1876. A.B. Dick Company commercialized it in 1884, and the machines were used in schools, offices, and churches through the 1980s. Mimeograph ink, a petroleum-based fluid in purple or blue, transferred to everything it contacted: hands, clothing, adjacent papers, and the clothing of anyone handling freshly printed materials for approximately 24 hours after printing. Mimeograph stencils were single-use and had to be replaced for each new document. Corrections required careful application of correction fluid to the wax stencil surface, typically producing a visible blemish on every subsequent copy. Xerographic photocopying, introduced commercially by Xerox in 1959, produced dry, clean copies without stencils. Mimeograph use declined steadily afterward, but persisted in school and church use through cost advantages alone. The mimeograph democratized publishing by ensuring that every democratically produced document smelled like a petroleum refinery and left purple ink on everyone who participated in the revolution. 81. The Theranos Edison blood testing device was a bold, disruptive Silicon Valley innovation that an entrenched medical establishment reflexively resisted. Visionary technology ahead of its regulatory environment, held back by conservative institutional gatekeepers unwilling to accept that traditional laboratory medicine could be challenged by a different approach. The Theranos Edison machine did not work. It could not perform most of the tests advertised using a fingerstick blood sample at the claimed accuracy levels. The company ran most patient samples on conventional third-party Siemens analyzers, while telling patients and investors the proprietary technology was being used, diluting blood samples to accommodate the machine's standard volume requirements in a process that affected result accuracy and was not disclosed. The CMS inspected the Theranos laboratory in 2015 and found immediate jeopardy-level deficiencies, the most serious category of regulatory finding, citing patient safety concerns. Theranos' laboratory certification was revoked in 2016. Patient impact included at least one documented false positive HIV result, causing significant psychological distress before correction. The broader impact of inaccurate diagnostic results on patient clinical decisions across the period of operation has not been fully characterized. Theranos is the definitive case study in the difference between disrupting an industry and simply not doing the thing the industry does. The Edison machine did not challenge blood testing. It replaced accurate blood testing with inaccurate blood testing, while investors provided $9 billion to watch. 82. Electric football. The battery-powered metal playing field that vibrates to move plastic player figurines, provided a realistic football simulation experience through mechanical innovation, offering American boys of the 1950s and 60s an authentic representation of the game's strategy and player movement in a tabletop format. Vibrating electric football moved players in random directions, determined entirely by vibration frequency, surface angle, and figurine base shape, producing a simulation of football in the same sense that an earthquake is a simulation of dancing, technically involving motion, fundamentally ungoverned by the intentions of any participant. Tudor Metal Products introduced electric football in 1947. The game was one of the best-selling toys in America through the 1950s and 70s. Player movement is not controlled during actual gameplay. Direction is preset by bending a figurine's base tabs before the buzzer activates, after which all players move independently based on vibration dynamics and surface interaction with zero input from either participant. Pile-ups, multiple players clustering in a vibrating mass in one corner of the field, were a consistent and documented gameplay outcome. Games could last 45 minutes, with the ball carrier never approaching the end zone because the vibrating figurine was circling in place 6 inches from its starting position. Electric football retains an adult collector community that has developed sophisticated pre-game positioning techniques over decades, which means serious enthusiasts have built genuine skill sets around mastering a game whose core mechanic is controlled chaos. 83, the self-heating soup can, using an exothermic chemical reaction between calcium oxide and water integrated into the can's base to heat contents without external infrastructure, represents genuine product innovation for consumers wanting hot food in contexts where cooking equipment is unavailable or impractical. Self-heating cans use a calcium oxide and water reaction that also produces calcium hydroxide, a caustic compound, in a mechanism integrated into the can base, requiring activation, an 8 to 10 minute wait, and then handling a can whose base may reach temperatures sufficient to cause contact burns. A sequence that introduces caustic chemistry and burn risk into a product category previously associated with neither. Self-heating food products have been commercially launched multiple times, including by Campbell's Soup and specialty camping product companies. Most launches were followed by market withdrawal due to insufficient consumer adoption. Consumer complaint patterns consistently included activation failure, insufficient heating, base burns, and the 8 to 10 minute wait time, which approaches the time required to heat soup conventionally in a microwave, a device available in the environments where self-heating cans are primarily purchased. The product's target use case, hot food without kitchen infrastructure, is addressed more reliably by military MRE heater pouches and insulated thermal containers, each outperforming self-heating cans in at least one critical parameter. The self-heating soup can introduce caustic chemistry into the soup delivery process in exchange for the convenience of waiting 10 minutes instead of 3. 84, olfactory biometric authentication, using the unique chemical signature of an individual's body chemistry as a security credential, represented forward-thinking security innovation explored by multiple researchers and companies in the early 2000s, a genuinely novel approach to the persistent problem of identity verification. Smell-based authentication requires the user to present body chemistry to a sensor at close range, is affected by diet, hygiene, illness, medication, and ambient temperature, cannot be changed if compromised, and produces a security credential that varies throughout the day based on what you ate for lunch, whether you exercised, and what antibiotic you are currently completing. A credential whose primary characteristic is that it is different today from what it was yesterday. Human body odor is generated primarily by bacterial metabolism of skin secretions and varies with diet, health status, stress level, and hygiene practices, making it a highly variable biometric compared to fingerprints or iris patterns, which remain stable across the conditions that make smell-based authentication unreliable. The compromise problem common to all biometrics is more severe for olfactory authentication. A compromised fingerprint can be replaced with a different finger. A compromised smell cannot be replaced with a different smell. Fingerprint, facial, and iris recognition were simultaneously being refined and deployed, offering stability that olfactory biometrics cannot provide by definition. The smell-based password is a security credential that changes every time you eat garlic, which is the opposite of what a password is supposed to do. 85, drive-in church represented a fringe worship novelty that mainstream religious institutions immediately rejected as a trivialization of sacred practice. A temporary pandemic accommodation at best, a cultural curiosity at worst, with no serious theological foundation or lasting institutional presence in American religious life. Drive-in churches were a genuine, theologically defended, institutionally established American worship format with dedicated purpose-built facilities, mainstream clergy advocates, and a documented revival during the 2020 pandemic that proved more structurally durable than critics across multiple generations had predicted. Robert Schuller's Garden Grove Drive-In Church, established in 1955, became the foundation from which the Crystal Cathedral was eventually built, one of the most architecturally significant religious buildings in American history, meaning the drive-in parking lot was not the compromised version of the ministry. It was the origin point from which the permanent institution grew. Multiple drive-in churches operated continuously across the American South and Midwest from the 1950s through the 1970s, serving mobility-limited worshipers and congregants preferring car-based attendance for practical reasons that churches with fixed pew seating could not accommodate. The COVID-19 pandemic produced hundreds of congregations transitioning to parking lot services in 2020, a rapid adoption that suggests the format was waiting for the right conditions rather than being genuinely rejected. The drive-in church is where American car culture and religious practice merged into something that either represents innovative outreach or explains several persistent trends in American religious participation data, depending on which direction you find more theologically concerning. 86. Automated rotating TV dinner trays, motorized Lazy Susans that mechanically presented different food compartments to the seated viewer at timed intervals, were a genuine mid-century innovation destined to transform domestic dining through the responsible application of mechanical engineering to the American mealtime experience. Engineers spent real time and money designing a system to eliminate the physical effort of reaching across a tray, addressing a problem that is solved with identical effectiveness by moving your arm 6 inches. A motion requiring fewer calories to execute than it takes to locate the power switch on the device replacing it. Multiple rotating tray patents were filed in the United States in the 1950s through 1970s as part of the broader convenience living commercial boom following post-war prosperity. The mechanical timing systems in early versions were notoriously imprecise. Consumer complaints documented food being presented at incorrect intervals, or the mechanism continuing to rotate mid-bite, depositing the mashed potatoes in the approximate location of where your fork was a moment ago. No rotating automatic dinner tray achieved mainstream commercial success. All versions were discontinued without meaningful market penetration. The concept has been periodically revived as a novelty item, confirming that each generation contains a percentage of people who will independently rediscover the appeal of a motorized tray before independently rediscovering why it didn't work the first time. 87. The rejuvenating goat gland transplant, John Brinkley's surgical procedure involving transplantation of goat testicular tissue into human men, was performed by a credentialed physician at a legitimate Kansas medical facility, a genuine, if unconventional medical intervention that attracted thousands of patients for reasons that reflect poorly on the available alternatives of the era. Brinkley had purchased his medical degree from the Eclectic Medical University of Kansas City, an institution that sold diplomas for $500. His surgical technique involved no mechanism by which goat tissue could restore human vitality, since transplanted goat tissue is rejected by the human immune system and provides no hormonal or functional integration with human biology under any known physiological pathway. Brinkley began performing goat gland transplant surgeries in Milford, Kansas around 1917, charging between $750 and $1,500 per procedure, equivalent to $13,000 to $26,000 today, and performed thousands of operations. He launched KFKB Radio, at the time one of the most powerful broadcast stations in North America, specifically to advertise his clinic and dispense medical advice by mail without examining patients. The American Medical Association systematically documented patient deaths and complications. His Kansas medical license was revoked in 1930. He subsequently ran as a write-in candidate for governor of Kansas and nearly won, which is the second most alarming thing in this paragraph. 88. Laser hair removal being described as permanent hair removal is a straightforward, accurate marketing claim. A precise description of what the technology achieves that consumers can reasonably rely upon when making decisions about a procedure requiring multiple sessions and significant financial investment. Laser hair removal is clinically described as permanent hair reduction, not permanent hair removal, a distinction that matters when you have paid for 6 to 8 sessions, expecting the first result, and received the second. The FDA cleared laser hair removal devices under the classification of permanent hair reduction, acknowledging that the procedure reduces hair density and regrowth rate significantly without guaranteeing complete elimination across all treated follicles. Individual results depend on hair color, skin tone, hormonal factors, and the specific device used, with darker coarse hair on lighter skin responding most effectively and lighter or finer hair responding less predictably. Multiple sessions are required because laser treatment only affects follicles in the active growth phase, and not all follicles are in active growth simultaneously, meaning the procedure must be repeated across multiple cycles to address the full follicle population. Maintenance sessions are often recommended indefinitely for areas subject to hormonal influence. The gap between permanent hair removal and permanent hair reduction is approximately the gap between what the marketing implies and what the consent form says, a gap you typically read in the correct order. 89. The goat gland transplant's commercial success, Brinkley's near gubernatorial career, and the entire trajectory of his operation confirm a pattern that appears across this list with uncomfortable regularity. The correlation between confident presentation and consumer trust is stronger than the correlation between demonstrated efficacy and consumer trust. The Theranos Edison machine raised $9 billion. The radioindoctrinator sold through legitimate pharmacies. Phrenology helmets were used in criminal sentencing. The common thread is not stupidity. It is the human tendency to accept authoritative framing as a substitute for independently verified results, which is a tendency that has not meaningfully diminished across the centuries this list covers. Every single inventor in this video was confident. Most of them were sincere. A significant number had credentials, institutional backing, or at minimum a credible-looking brochure. Confidence without mechanism, credentials without verification, and institutional backing without accountability are a reliable combination for producing products that cause harm while generating profit. And the historical record suggests that each generation encounters this combination as though it were new. You have now sat through 89 entries in that record. The question worth carrying out of this video is not which inventor was the most embarrassing. It is which current products will be on this list in 50 years, and whether you are buying one of them right now. 90. The dedicated electric pickle fork, a vibrating or rotating fork designed to spear pickles from jars more effectively, addresses a genuine consumer challenge through the application of motorized assistance to a food retrieval task that resists conventional utensil approaches due to the slippery, mobile nature of the target in a liquid medium. The pickle retrieval challenge is solved by tilting the jar, using a standard fork, or pouring the contents into a bowl, any of which outperforms a battery-powered extraction device in speed, reliability, and the maintenance of your dignity in a kitchen setting where guests might observe the process. A standard fork extracts a pickle from a standard jar in approximately 3 seconds without batteries, without charging, without cleaning around a motorized mechanism, and without the implicit admission that you considered the problem serious enough to require a dedicated powered solution. The motorized approach to slippery object retrieval is also mechanically counterproductive. Vibration destabilizes the target rather than improving grip, meaning the electric pickle fork's core mechanism works against the task it is designed to assist. The product exists in a broader market of single-purpose jar retrieval tools, including olive spoons, cocktail onion picks, and cherry spoons, each solving the problem of a narrow mouth container with a purpose-built tool rather than a fork already present on your table. The electric pickle fork is a battery-powered solution to a problem that a regular fork already solves. 91. The dedicated mechanical egg yolk separator, a purpose-built device for dividing egg yolks from whites, represents practical kitchen innovation, providing a hygienic, reliable method for a culinary task that demands precision and benefits from a consistent tool, purpose-designed around the specific geometry and fragility of the egg yolk. Egg yolk separation is performed by cracking the egg and transferring the yolk between the two shell halves, a technique available to anyone in possession of the egg, and therefore already in possession of the required equipment, since the equipment is the egg. The shell transfer method requires 0 additional tools, creates no additional washing, and is taught as a foundational culinary skill in every cooking curriculum at every level of instruction. Alternative methods, including using a clean hand to cup the yolk while white drains through the fingers, or using a clean water bottle squeezed and released to suction the yolk, are additional 0 equipment options covering different dexterity preferences. The egg separator's commercial persistence depends on consumer unfamiliarity with the shell transfer technique, a skill gap the product addresses by substituting a purchasable object for a learnable skill, converting a 30-second technique into a product requiring procurement, storage, and a separate washing procedure. The egg already contains its own separation device. The commercial egg separator exists to replace it with something you have to buy and explain. 92. Dedicated toast tongs. Wooden or silicone tongs designed exclusively for retrieving toast from a toaster. Represent thoughtful kitchen safety innovation, protecting users from the hazard of inserting metal objects into a toaster by providing a purpose-built non-metal retrieval tool for a specific and recurring kitchen task. The actual safety risk, metal contact with toaster heating elements during operation, is eliminated by unplugging the toaster before reaching inside, which requires no additional equipment and is the recommendation of every toaster manufacturer's safety instructions in every market where toasters are sold. Multi-purpose kitchen tongs, present in most kitchens for salad, pasta, grilling, and general food handling. Retrieve toast from a toaster with identical effectiveness to dedicated toast tongs without requiring a dedicated storage location for a single function implement that does one thing once per morning and then occupies drawer space for the remaining 23 hours and 50 minutes of the day. The kitchen gadget industry's consistent commercial strategy is converting multi-purpose skills and existing implements into single-purpose products, which increases equipment inventory while reducing the skills required to use that inventory, producing kitchens increasingly full of dedicated tools and decreasingly populated by people who know how to cook without them. Toast tongs are the logical endpoint of this strategy. A drawer so full of dedicated implements that retrieving toast requires first locating the specific tool designated for toast, which is stored next to the specific tool designated for bananas. 93. The self-heating soup can, requiring activation, an 8 to 10 minute wait, and careful handling of a base reaching burn-capable temperatures, is a worthwhile trade-off delivering genuine convenience value that justifies its additional complexity, cost, and the introduction of caustic calcium hydroxide chemistry into a food product category that previously involved none of those considerations. The self-heating can has been commercially launched multiple times by multiple manufacturers, including Campbell's Soup, and most launches have been followed by market withdrawal due to insufficient consumer adoption, a pattern that does not describe a product succeeding at delivering its value proposition. Consumer complaint patterns across commercial launches have been consistent: activation failure, insufficient heating, base burns, and the wait time. The wait time complaint is particularly revealing because the 8 to 10 minute self-heating period approaches or equals the time required to heat the same soup in a microwave, which is available in the environments where self-heating cans are primarily purchased and sold. The product's claimed advantage, hot food without external heat infrastructure, is delivered more reliably by military MRE heater pouches and insulated thermal containers, each outperforming the self-heating can in at least one parameter that matters. The self-heating can introduces a caustic chemical reaction and a burn risk into the soup delivery process in exchange for saving approximately 2 to 3 minutes, which is not a trade-off the market has consistently chosen to accept. 94. Leeches were a crude, obviously ineffective relic of pre-scientific medicine, a practice so visibly wrong that educated physicians abandoned it immediately upon the arrival of modern medical science, an embarrassing symbol of everything pre-Enlightenment healthcare got persistently and comprehensively wrong. Medical leeches are FDA-approved medical devices, manufactured under clinical conditions by certified medical suppliers, including biopharm leeches in Wales, sold to hospitals and surgical centers for documented clinical indications, and represent a case where the historical practice was applied to the wrong patients for the wrong reasons for 2,000 years before being readmitted to medicine for the right patients for the right reasons, which means the leech was never the problem. The FDA approved medicinal leeches as a medical device in 2004. The current clinical indication is congested tissue flaps and replanted digits following microsurgery, specifically post-surgical venous insufficiency, where mechanical drainage and the leech's anticoagulant saliva, compound Hirudin, provide genuinely therapeutic effects that no pharmaceutical alternative delivers as efficiently. Hirudin has been synthesized pharmaceutically as leporudin, used for heparin-resistant anticoagulation, confirming that the leech's biochemical toolkit contains compounds useful enough to replicate in a laboratory. The leech was used incorrectly for 2,000 years, dismissed as pseudoscience, and then reinstated for correct use. The leech has outlasted every physician who applied it to everyone for everything, and it will likely outlast this video. 95. The iPhone 4's antenna design, incorporating a stainless steel band as both the device's structural frame and its external antenna, was a minor technical characteristic blown out of proportion by media coverage and by users who lacked basic understanding of how radio antenna physics interact with conductive materials held in close proximity. Apple's own engineers had flagged the antenna design as problematic before the iPhone 4's launch, according to internal documents subsequently reviewed in patent litigation. The specific failure mode, signal attenuation when the lower left corner of the device was contacted by the hand during normal holding, was a known engineering characteristic of the design, not an unforeseen user behavior. Steve Jobs' initial public response advised users to avoid holding the phone in the way that caused signal loss, which is advice about a telephone that requires holding. Apple subsequently offered free bumper cases to all iPhone 4 customers, a response that addressed the problem while maintaining no official admission of design fault, a simultaneously pragmatic and linguistically careful resolution. AntennaGate generated formal regulatory attention in multiple countries and became a standard case study in product crisis communication, cited primarily as an example of how not to respond to a confirmed product characteristic that affects core functionality. Apple designed a phone whose antenna degraded when held and suggested holding it differently, advice useful for any device that is not specifically a telephone. 96. The Sinclair Black Watch. Launched in 1975 as a digital calculator wristwatch, failed due to market immaturity and consumer unfamiliarity with digital technology, representing a genuinely innovative product that arrived before its commercial environment was prepared to receive and support it properly. The Black Watch failed because it didn't work. Which magazine tested it in 1975 and found it functioning correctly in fewer than half of tested units. A pass rate that would be considered unacceptable for a product in any consumer category, including categories with significantly lower safety and reliability expectations than a wristwatch. The pre-assembled version suffered display failures, button contact problems, and battery contacts that corroded under normal use. The self-assembly kit version had a failure rate high enough that Sinclair offered a professional assembly service, an implicit acknowledgement that the product could not be reliably built by the consumers it had been sold to, which is a fundamental product quality problem rather than a market maturity problem. A market maturity problem is when the audience isn't ready for your product. A product quality problem is when your product doesn't function in the hands of the people who purchased it. The Black Watch had the second kind of problem, which is not improved by waiting for the market to mature. It is improved by building a watch that works, which is a lower bar than it sounds, and a higher bar than the Black Watch cleared. 97. The Vibrating Football Game. Tudor Electric Football's metal playing field, buzzing with plastic figurines moving in directions determined by vibration dynamics rather than player input, provided American boys of the post-war era with an authentic, strategic simulation of professional football that rewarded careful planning and spatial thinking through its mechanical gameplay. Electric football moved players in random directions, governed entirely by vibration frequency, surface angle, and base tab geometry, producing gameplay in which the most consequential decisions occurred before the buzzer activated, and everything during play was determined by physics, which is either the most honest simulation of certain coaching philosophies or the least controllable toy ever sold as a sports game. Tudor Metal Products introduced electric football in 1947. The game sold millions of units through the 1950s and 70s. Pile-ups, multiple figurines clustering in a vibrating mass in one corner of the field, were a consistent, documented, and entirely unpreventable gameplay outcome, regardless of how carefully the starting positions were arranged. Games could last 45 minutes, with the ball carrier never advancing meaningfully, because the vibrating figurine was circling in place. The game retains an adult collector community that has developed genuine pre-game positioning expertise across decades. People who have built real skill sets around mastering a game whose core mechanic is that skill is not the deciding variable. 98. The automated soup cooling fan, the self-stirring mug, the motorized ice cream cone, the automatic spaghetti fork, the banana slicer, the avocado saver, the egg separator, the butter curler, the dedicated toast tongs, and the electric pickle fork represent not isolated product failures, but a coherent and recurring commercial philosophy. The conversion of existing human capabilities into purchasable products sold back to the people who already possess the capability, at a price point low enough that the transaction feels trivial, and a storage requirement high enough that the cumulative effect fills an entire kitchen drawer. This drawer, which exists in a statistically significant percentage of kitchens, contains implements for tasks that hands, forks, knives, and 30 seconds of practice already perform. Purchased one at a time in moments of optimism about efficiency, received one at a time as gifts from people who wanted to appear useful, and retained indefinitely, because throwing them away requires admitting the original purchase was unnecessary. The kitchen gadget industry is not selling you tools. It is selling you the feeling that the minor frictions of daily food preparation are problems serious enough to require engineering solutions, and then providing engineering solutions whose primary function is confirming that the frictions were not actually problems. The drawer is the product. Everything inside it is evidence. 99, the Black Watch, the C5, and Wardenclyffe Tower share a narrative structure that this list has now illustrated 100 times in slightly different configurations. The inventor who was genuinely ahead of the curve, the inventor who was confidently wrong, and the inventor who was correct about the problem and incorrect about the solution, all presented with identical levels of personal certainty and institutional backing at the moment of launch. You cannot tell which category an inventor occupies from their confidence level, their credentials, their media coverage, or the sophistication of their brochure. You can tell from the results, and the results take time to arrive, and in the interim, the investment has already been made. The product has already been purchased, and the brochure is already in someone's archive, being cited as proof that the vision was real. The pattern this list describes is not a historical pattern. It is a current one. The phrenology helmet was replaced by the personality assessment tool. The vibrating weight loss belt was replaced by the electronic AB device. The radium water was replaced by the supplement with the confident label and the proprietary blend. Each generation inherits the previous generation's disproven products in new packaging, purchases them with the same optimism, and discovers the same results on approximately the same timeline. The list is not finished. It is ongoing. 100, the Ford Nucleon, the flying car, Smell-O-Vision, the pedestrian catcher, the goat gland transplant, and the parachute hat each failed for reasons their inventors could have identified before launch had they asked one specific question that inventors reliably do not ask. Not whether the product is possible, but whether the product is necessary, safe, and better than the existing solution at the thing it claims to replace. The existing solution is almost always underrated. Walking is underrated. A fork is underrated. A spoon is underrated. A door that closes is underrated. Waiting 3 minutes for soup to heat is underrated. The consistent error across this entire list is not insufficient ambition. It is the assumption that complexity is improvement, that a mechanical solution to a manual task is automatically superior to the manual task, and that the existence of a problem is sufficient justification for the development of any solution, regardless of whether the solution is better than the problem. The Segway looked at walking and saw a gap in the market. The gap was not in the market. The gap was in the engineering brief. Every entry on this list represents a moment when someone looked at something that worked and decided it needed to be replaced with something more expensive that worked less reliably. That is not the exception in the history of invention. That is a recurring tendency requiring active resistance. 101. You just sat through 101 inventions that serious, credentialed, confident people were genuinely proud of. Products that received patents, funding, media coverage, institutional endorsement, and in several cases, Nobel Prizes and government contracts. And every single one of those people believed, at the moment of launch, that they were the exception. The one who actually got it right. The one history would vindicate, rather than feature on a list like this. The question the outline for this video promised to leave you with is which current products will occupy this list in 50 years? And the honest answer is that you are already using some of them. You are using them with the same confidence that Bayer had about heroin, that Ford had about the Nucleon, that the shoe store had about the fluoroscope, and that every person who has ever strapped a radium applicator to themselves, or suspended their infant in a window cage, or purchased a motorized tray had about their particular version of the solution. The list does not end here. It continues in real time, funded by your purchasing decisions, and insulated by your confidence that this time the brochure is accurate. Which inventor are you defending in your head right now? Drop it in the comments, make the case, and let the comments section determine which myth dies the hardest. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now